Chapter 1696. Lu Xiaoyi instantly lost his temper. This was because there were two ancient characters on the hilt of the sword spirit's incarnation. 3 Qin. You can't fool me. I've seen Uncle Qin before. On the sword Dao tablet, I also saw the 11 Yang spirit, slayings you left behind. Lu Xiaoyi was still in a daze when the sword spirit suddenly turned and slashed 2 sword beams at him. They brushed past his cheeks, as if they were scraping his face. He knew why he was slashed twice. It was because the 3 Qin had only left behind 9 impressions on the sword Dao tablet, not 11. Therefore, 2 impressions had to be removed. Clearly, the sword spirit had difficulty condensing the word, so it could not do more. However, this was enough. The aura, the name, and the 2 slashes were enough. How could someone who had not experienced the sword Dao tablet and 3 lives realm know such a secret? He did not feel any joy, only sadness. Meeting in such a manner was unbearable for him. He immediately bowed, still not speaking human language. You're already like this, yet you still come out to scare people. The sword spirit trembled even more violently. If not for its firm sword heart, it would have been scattered by this disdainful disciple. Cunning and crafty, without any respect for his elders, unbridled and unbridled. However, he always did shocking things and did not walk the normal path. He was somewhat similar to a certain person in its memories. He was young, and his cultivation level was not high, but he had already done great things in the universe's cultivation world. Thinking back, it was just like the person it had met in the universe's void 20,000 years ago. The words, "Have you eaten?" were still fresh in its memory. Xian Yuan was not alone, and the sword Dao existed forever. Generation after generation of outstanding disciples appeared. It did not need to worry about the sword vein's future after it left. In front of it was Scoundrelly, and behind it was Hoodlum Lu. The more people like this, the more it felt at ease. It had no regrets. The sword spirit shook and stabbed diagonally. It grabbed Lu Xiaoyi's belt and flew towards the dense fog. Lu Xiaoyi could do nothing about it. Although the 3 Qins weren't considered ancestors, their status in Xuanyuan's sword vein was no small matter. He had been in charge of Xian Yuan for thousands of years. He was the longest among all the ancestors. He was also the one who had achieved great things and was highly regarded by the masses. His era was the most powerful era in the history of Xian Yuan. Not only did he successfully complete the role change from Blue Sky to 5 Ring, but there were also many amazing people in the sect, such as Shixing, Chong Lu, and Crow Ancestor. They were recognized as the most powerful generation in Xian Yuan's sword school. As the host, the 3 Qins played an important role. The sky waxes and wanes. The moon waxes and wanes. People are divided into submissive and submissive. Sects rise and fall. No one, or any force, could remain strong forever. There would always be a time when the tide would rise and fall. The true leaders would always enter the fast lane of strength before the arrival of a great change. Perhaps there would be a surge of talents, or perhaps there would be a sudden emergence of a new force. This was the trend of the times. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't insist on doing things his own way with such an ancestor. Moreover, in Xuanyuan's evaluation, the 3 Qins had always been known for their foresight and foresight. Although it wasn't in person now, it was a sword spirit that had followed him for tens of thousands of years. Even if it was a piece of rotten wood, it should be able to grind out some spirituality, right? It must have a purpose. It must have something that it felt it had to do. That was why it forcefully brought him to the intersection of the 3 realms. This definitely had nothing to do with the personal grudges of the 3 Qins. This was the usual style of this ancestor. An existence of his realm would not force his disciples to walk the path he chose. Not to mention a primordial soul perfected cultivator. Even the Yuanying perfected cultivator Xian Yuan wouldn't set a cultivation path for someone. That could only be related to one thing, Xian Yuan. After thinking through this point, Lu Xiaoyi no longer had any misgivings. It was his duty to contribute to the sect. The sword was shining brightly. That was the sword spirit's unrestrained energy overdraft. Obviously, the sword spirit was no longer thinking about its future. This was also in line with the style of a swordsman. It was far better to leave freely than to struggle at death's door. There were still many questions, but now was not the time to ask. Among them, the most important one was the heaven of interior and heaven of exterior. Where would the sword spirits send him? According to the sect's records, the ancestors of the three Cheens walked the path of the declined state. Therefore, the chances of them going to the exterior realms were very high. In any case, the three Cheens had stayed there for 10 or 20,000 years. They must have a lot of connections. The sword spirit was no longer shining brightly. It was basically burning itself. The decline of a generation of sword immortals was happening in front of him. It was a pity. It was different from the splendid heaven and earth in the mortal world. The mortal world was guarded by manpower. Here, there was a layer of dense fog that belonged to the power of cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi's mortal body could do nothing about it, but the sword spirit obviously had its own way. As the sword shone brightly and broke through the layer of dense fog, Lu Xiaoyi was pushed into it. Immediately, he felt the seal in the depths of his soul loosen. The deeper it went, the more it loosened. The sword spirit's aura became weaker and weaker, but its brilliance became stronger and stronger. Lu Xiaoyi felt his power gradually returning to his body. When he regained it after losing it for several decades, it was even more precious. Finally, the sword spirit's remaining power could not push it any further. It stopped at the last layer of dense fog. The sword spirit let out a shrill cry, as if it was provoking the injustice of heaven. You really don't care about your body. If it was someone else, both of us would be stuck in there like specimens. Chi Ant swung out, and the majestic power pierced through the last thin layer of dense fog. Lu Xiaoyi felt that he was suspended in a void. Luckily, he had completely broken free from the seal. Otherwise, who knew where he would fall? At the same time, he felt the sword spirit's last remnant shadow plunging into Chi Ant and disappearing. The three Cheens, along with the last thought he had left in this world, had completely become history. There was no time to be sentimental. Lu Xiaoyi had to determine his direction in the shortest time possible. Behind him was the layer of dense fog. He couldn't go back. In front of him, he could feel that there were two different paths. Although he didn't know where they led, he knew which path was closed to him and which was open. On the right path, there was a faint force pushing him back. He squeezed a few more steps forward and found that the pushing force was getting stronger. He knew that this path was blocked. In fact, in this place that was a few levels higher than him, there was no room for him to choose. He could only walk to the left because there was no force pushing him back. Mount Hua was a path. The sword spirit didn't provide any help to his choice. Perhaps he had also expected this. But what made him feel a little confused was that if the three Cheens had given him a mission, what kind of mission was it? How could he guess in such an unclear way? The road ahead was not far, especially now that he had completely recovered his full strength. It would only take a few breaths of time. There was a mysterious force stirring around his body. He could guess that this might be the force that isolated the inner and outer realm from each other, but it had no effect on him. He was a little confused when he took a step forward. There were celestial mountains in front of him, surrounded by auspicious clouds. Spiritual vigor seemed to be substantial. An ancient and boundless feeling came over him. He had also heard people talk about the exterior realm. It didn't seem like this. Could it be that he had come to the interior realm? The three Cheens definitely hadn't come here before. Had he come to the wrong place? Chapter 1697. Lu Xiaoyi was a little confused. This wasn't the exterior heaven he had imagined, so it could only be the interior heaven. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed to make sense. The exterior heaven only accepted cultivators in the declined state. Lu Xiaoyi's cultivation level wasn't high enough, so it was impossible for him to enter the declined state. So it was normal for him to be rejected. He had always wondered if he should go through the back door of the three Qin dynasties, but now it seemed that the patriarch didn't mean to do so. The interior heaven advocated ancient methods to become immortal, such as severing three corpses. Lu Xiaoyi certainly didn't follow the path of severing three corpses but his method of integrating the big and small universes seemed to be an ancient method. As for the low cultivation level, he didn't know if he had to sever a corpse to enter. Now it seemed that he didn't need to do so. As a newcomer, he had to tuck his tail between his legs. Lu Xiaoyi kept reminding himself that this wasn't the main world, but a place where half-immortals gathered. He couldn't be cocky and would lose his life. From the bottom of his heart, he really didn't want to come to this place. He had a strong, vital spirit and could act like a big shot in the main world cultivation world. He had only been in the limelight for a few days, and the sword in his hand hadn't shown off its brilliance. Now he was forced to stay in the half-celestial realm and continue to be a coward. As a newcomer to the celestial realm, he didn't feel nervous, but he had to be more careful. Obviously, the countless celestial mountains in the distance couldn't be ownerless. If he rashly entered, he could only bet on his luck and see if he met someone who was easy to talk to, or someone who was prejudiced against the sword vein. Therefore, the best way was to not act rashly and just quietly observe and appreciate, because in his heart, this wasn't a place he was qualified to stay. This world was like a huge painting of mountains and rivers. The heavenly way splashed ink on it, and all the scenic spots and historical sites in the universe were included in it, forming a three-dimensional ancient scenery. It was like a huge universe, but instead of celestial phenomena, there were mountains and rivers, vast seas and vast sands, swamps and forests. Many of these places were places where sages of the past had become saints. This kind of mighty power was no longer something a celestial sage could do. Except for the natural formation of the universe's will, no one else could create such a space. As soon as Lu Xiaoyi entered the interior sky, he immediately understood why this place was a paradise for ancient techniques. Because this was a completely ancient environment, the order of the heavenly Tao had not been completely established. It was still growing, forming, colliding, and devouring in the chaos. Such an environment could not form a stable path to the upper realm. That kind of grinding technique that relied on entering the declining realm to grind time would not work here at all, because the environment of the great Tao was always changing. But unconsciously, it was very compatible with his method of fusing the great and small universes. Thus, he understood that the method he had created was actually an ancient method. However, it was an ancient method that had been lost long ago. It was an ancient method that required the right time, the right place, and the right people. It was an ancient method that was born at the right time and destroyed at the wrong time. If he could seize the opportunity when the epoch changed, he would be able to reach the heavens in a single bound. If he couldn't, then this was a failed ancient method. Looking into the distance, he vaguely discovered that there were still ordinary people living here. It was not completely exclusive to the demi-immortals. Thus, he restrained his breath and flew at a low altitude, not daring to be too conspicuous. Not long after, he arrived at a human village. He did not enter, but observed beside an ancient pine on a hill outside the village. Thus, he gained some understanding of the place. This place was still thousands of miles away from the nearest mountain. It was very majestic. It stood in the clouds, and its top and bottom were unknown. It stretched for thousands of miles, and there were countless strange peaks. It was unknown which famous mountain in the universe had been materialized here by the will of the heavenly Tao. The spiritual vigor in the interior sky was incomparable to any of the realms in the main world. Not only was it as thick as liquid, but it was also wild and uncontrollable. In such a place, what kind of human could safely embark on the path of Taoism? After carefully observing these villagers, Lin Fan found the answer. The mortals here and the mortals in the origin world were two different concepts. Although they did not practice any martial arts, their bodies seemed to be born with some kind of martial arts. Even so, their superior physical conditions did not help them too much, because they also faced troubles that the mortals in the origin world did not encounter. For example, unpredictable natural disasters and rampaging demonic beasts. These were probably the real living conditions of the ancient humans, right? He was still figuring out everything about the interior sky. This could only be left to time and could not be rushed. After looking at the environment, it was time to turn around and look at himself. This time, after the seal was lifted, it was not done by the same person. Or rather, it was not done in the same environment. When he entered, he was sealed by the rules of the splendid heaven and earth. When he came out, he was freed by the mighty force of the interior sky. He needed to examine carefully to see if there was any difference. He was a cautious person, always paying attention to his own state. Only when he fought with all his might could he not have any worries. One by one, he thoroughly checked his whole body. There was nothing strange, and no one had done anything to his body. This was expected, and it was not surprising, except for one thing: his chi ant. He put his divine sense in the sparrow palace. The chi ant swam slowly. It looked normal, but there was a faint breath emitting from it, and it did not hide it. It seemed to have an additional temperament. Live to the fullest, die without regrets. This was what the sword spirit of the three Qin had left for him. He slowly surrounded it with his divine sense. He knew that this was the real message that the sword spirit had left for him, and he needed to study it slowly. Although he had never really met this ancestor, Lu Xiaoyi believed that they were fated to meet. In the sword Tao steel, there was also this final farewell. This was the inheritance. What the sword spirit wanted to tell him was actually very simple. There was no cultivation method or swordsmanship. These things were basically meaningless to a primordial spirit. What the three Qin were good at might not necessarily be what Lu Xiaoyi liked. At their level, they all walked their own path, and there was no one to teach them. It was just pointing him to meet a person who was incomparably important to Xian Yuan. One was a mountain scenery with a hanging wall eagle nest. It did not take up much space, but it was extremely high. The cliff was covered with large and small eagle nests, and the person the sword spirit wanted him to find was probably among them. The other picture was a person, handsome and elegant. Lu Xiaoyi had seen a portrait of this person in the ancestral hall at the dome, and he was not unfamiliar with it. So he was actually walking the path of ancient cultivation. There was no specific mission. It was just one place and one person. He could not figure out which ancestor was cultivating in this hanging wall eagle nest. Or were there two people? It should be this person who was cultivating on the eagle cliff. His divine sense continued to go deeper, but the sword spirit of the three Qin had no other instructions. It only left a gray ball at the core of the sword spirit. Lu Xiaoyi probed it and immediately knew what it was. It was the true meaning of the great Tao of reincarnation left behind by the corpse lotus. In order to wrap up this ball of true meaning of the great Tao, the sword spirit had wasted a huge amount of energy just to give the younger generation a chance to take a look at the great Tao. From beginning to end, the sword spirit of the three Qin did not say any nonsense, but it also seemed to have said countless words, vividly displaying the strength of an old swordsman who was serious in speech and manner, and whose sword heart was like iron. The ancestors' intentions must be accepted. Accepting it was equivalent to accepting Xuanyuan's blow. Lu Xiaoyi was willing. Under the pine tree, Lu Xiaoyi's face was still like water. He could not let down the three Qin's good intentions, and he could no longer avoid his responsibility to Xian Yuan. Fate comes to me under the pine tree. I sleep on a high pillow. There is no calendar in the mountains, and the cold does not know the year. Chapter 1698. What Lu Xiaoyi didn't expect was that the first thing he did after entering interior heaven was to raise his reincarnation Tao from beginner level to a basic level. The rest still needed time to polish and wasn't something that could be done overnight. When he woke up from the enlightenment of reincarnation, he didn't know how much time had passed. Anyway, a carefree girl in the village was now married. Time really didn't mean much here. What was a few thousand years' worth of lifespan? The village was a self-sufficient place. Over the years, very few outsiders came near, and very few villagers went out. They were still living a family lifestyle with very little social cooperation, self-farming, and plenty of food and clothing. They did not have as many tools as the people who came after them, and they did not have a rich and colorful entertainment life. The most common way of communication was probably the most primitive market, which was still in a rudimentary mode of fighting against the heavens and the earth. He didn't want to disturb the lives of these mortals. Cultivators still had to find other cultivators. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. First, he had to find someone he could communicate with. If he got rid of Buddhism, he might have to get rid of Orthodox Taoism. This made him very embarrassed. The sword veins attitude towards cultivation really made it difficult for them to have the kind of connections that were all over the world and close neighbors in the universe. They were probably a little better than insects, but there was a limit to how good they could be. He stood up and laughed at himself. What's wrong with me? Did I really become a chicken after coming to a new place? The breath left by the sword spirits of the three chain swords was to live happily and die without regrets. How long has it been? And I've forgotten it all. He had to admit that in terms of open-mindedness and living a carefree life, he was still far from these older swordsmen. If that's the case, why think so much? Let's start from the nearest celestial mountain. Who cares who it is? If we can talk, we'll talk. If we can't talk, we'll fight. What's the big deal? Once he made up his mind, he felt relaxed. How much does cultivation have to do with realms? Since he came to the celestial mountain, he was the fated one. This was the correct concept of cultivation. In a world of ignorance, there would only be surprises if he continued walking. Not long after, he was already floating on top of the celestial mountain. He looked down and saw the scenery of the celestial mountain. There were no traces of man-made chiseling. Everything was natural. The mountain was called Hidden Dragon Mountain because there was a cave on the mountainside. The cave was called Hidden Dragon Cave, and there was a poem engraved on it. The dragon returns to the primordial sea. The young hides in the Een. People say the dragon hides, but I hides in the heart. Silence hides its use. Breaths are deep. The white clouds lie high. The world has no bosom friend. Lu Xiaoyi silently observed the terrain of the mountain, and then looked into the depth of the cave. He paced back and forth for a while, and then left in disappointment. This was a good place, but there was no one to set up a base here. What he wanted now was to find someone, not a cave for cultivation. Before he left, he wrote a poem on a blue stone outside the cave, thinking that he had come here. At the silent hibernation dragon gate, seeking the truth does not meet the truth. Only the crane on the pine is the person in the cave. The fragrance of the flowers in the herb garden is different. The deer in the sand spring is new. Just as he stepped onto the cloud, a voice sounded out. Since you're already here, you should take things as they come. Fellow Taoist, are you blaming my master for being indifferent and lacking in manners for leaving in such a hurry? Lu Xiaoyi clasped his hands in the cloud. I'm a newcomer who doesn't know the rules. I accidentally entered a new world, and I'm in fear and trepidation, seeking the truth. The voice laughed. Seeking the truth, you've come to the wrong place. It's just a simple person in the mountain who hasn't cared about the world for a long time. An old Taoist floated out of the hibernation dragon cave. He had the demeanor of an immortal and raised his hand to invite him. Lu Xiaoyi leaped down and gladly accepted the invitation. He had a new understanding of this place called interior sky. Just now, he didn't fully open his divine sense, nor did he explore the bottom of the cave. This had nothing to do with his ability. It was just a form of politeness. Just like a visitor in the mortal world, when a master is not home, you can't just lean against the window and look carefully, can you? Or jump over the wall to find out what's going on. Being carefree is carefree, and being polite is being polite. Only by keeping to one's duty would there be all kinds of things after that. This was the basic cultivation of a cultivator. But he also had to admit that a half-immortal was a half-immortal. This breath was restrained as if it was light, and there wasn't a trace of smoke or fire. Even if Lu Xiaoyi didn't use his full strength, his perception was still very good. He couldn't smell any trace of human breath, which showed the level of the cultivators here. Outside the cave, ancient pine trees were connected. The two of them sat on top of the pine tree and chatted. The old Taoist glanced at Lu Xiaoyi. It's rare to have such achievements at such a young age. I'm Lu Jiang, and I'm living here. Little friend, you're new here. Don't think that I'm some hibernation dragon immortal, a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest. I'm just borrowing it for shelter. Lu Xiaoyi was very polite. It's a drop in the ocean, not worth mentioning. It's a coincidence. I'm still wondering how I can come to a place like this with my current state. I want to leave, but I also want to see. It's very contradictory. I'm cigarette, and I'm happy to meet such a virtuous person. If there's any noise, please forgive me. Lu Jiang sneered. Since you can come in, you're qualified. Why should I care about your state? Little friend, you're in the primordial spirit realm. In the history of the interior heaven, almost half of the yang spirits and yin spirits have come in. As long as you don't follow the old path and don't walk the path of decline, the heavenly axiom recognizes you, and you're qualified. Lu Xiaoyi blushed with shame. The main thing is that the heavenly axiom is flawed, so the gap is a little bigger. If we push back for tens of thousands of years, the primordial spirit might not be able to enter. If we push back for tens of thousands of years, the yang spirit might not be able to enter. Lu Jiang smiled. What do you do before pushing? You just have to stand there. Now that you can come in, it's a form of recognition. As for the heavenly axiom being flawed, when has the heavenly axiom not been flawed? Lu Xiaoyi said seriously. May I ask, senior, what do I have to pay attention to when I'm new here? What do I have to understand? What do I have to do? Lu Jiang also said seriously. Do as you wish. Where are the rules? Our generation's ancient methods should follow our hearts. Don't tell me that you're no longer you when you come here. For example, if you see that my place is not bad and want to take it, why can't you? You leaving a poem is a kind of fate. The two of us have done it once, so it's another kind of fate. There's not much difference between the two. Me asking you to stay for a chat today doesn't mean anything. On another day, in a different environment, maybe I'll take your head. There are no rules. Do you understand what I'm saying? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Senior, you're straightforward. That's the style of ancient cultivation. I've learned a lot. It's a pure coincidence that I came to interior heaven. Since I'm here, I have to experience it to be worthy of this opportunity. But after experiencing it, I still have to leave. If I just want to travel, has Senior taught me anything? Lu Jiang shook his head. You still don't understand. There's no such thing as traveling here. Once you're here, you're a person of interior heaven. You have to accept everything here, whether it's good or bad. Those who cultivate the ancient methods mostly act freely and rarely hide. This is the temperament of interior heaven. But if you want to ask about the general environment of interior heaven, I'm in a good mood today, so I don't mind saying a few words. The heart is Tao, and Tao is the heart. There's no Tao outside the heart, and there's no heart outside the Tao. Since you're here, don't think too much. Chapter 1699. With Lu Jiang's introduction, he gradually uncovered the various aspects of the interior heaven, allowing him to finally have a preliminary understanding of this mysterious place. The interior heaven was very big, so big that it was beyond his imagination. However, after all, it was limited by its shape and not infinite. If it was understood as a three-dimensional concentric sphere, it would be much simpler. In the interior heaven, there were countless famous mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas. These were all landforms of the main world, but they were not purely fictional. Why did they choose these sceneries? Not for other reasons, but because these historical sites had produced people who had stepped into the immortal realm. Therefore, when the will of the universe created the interior heaven, it tacitly recognized these places as qualified to enter the interior heaven. Of course, they were basically people from the ancient times. Under the current cultivation system, if they could finally step into the immortal realm, they might not be able to have such glory. This was because the probability of becoming an immortal was so low that it was hair-raising. Moreover, most of them became immortals in the deteriorating state. The environment of the interior heaven did not approve of this. There were more than 3,600 famous mountains, great rivers, and great lakes in the interior heaven. This was a fixed number. It had not increased for a long time. This was not necessarily the number of man-immortals. Some had fallen, some had merged with the Way, some had disintegrated by force, and some had ascended through the path of ancient methods. Therefore, no one knew how many people there were up there now. Only when you reached that realm could you have a rough idea. In the interior heaven, the cultivators were completely free. There were no special rules to follow except for two. It was considered a rare group activity in the interior heaven. One was compulsory, called the Wall of Mirrors. All the cultivators in the interior heaven were obliged to participate in it, of course, including those in the exterior heaven. It was around every few years. It was for the safety of the universe's cultivation world, so it could not be refused. One was spontaneous. Once every 360 years, there would be a simulation of a mortal ascension at the center of the interior realm. This was also the most important thing for the cultivators of the interior realm. They could always learn from other people's experiences. In the interior heaven, there were 3,600 scenic spots and historical sites. In ancient history, there were people who had achieved Tao and ascended. Every ancient site in the interior day would revolve around the center in a mysterious trajectory, either fast or slow, or far from the center, or close to the center. When the date of 360 years came to an end, in the last few decades, the ancient site closest to the center would be attracted until it reached the center of the entire interior day. Then this ancient site would have the grand scene of a cultivator becoming an immortal. Therefore, in the last few decades, the cultivators of the interior heaven could basically determine which ancient site would lead to the center and which would lead to the realm of immortal ascension. They even knew the characteristics of the cultivation methods displayed in the exhibition of the immortals this time. The master of each ancient site practiced different cultivation methods. The most common one was the slaying 3 corpses, followed by the integration of Tao, followed by the 3 lights of Dantian, the sanctification of inner spirit, the great portrait art, and dozens of others. For example, the hidden dragon cave and the hidden dragon mountain occupied by Lu Jiang was the ancient immortal master hidden dragon. He was an immortal who achieved integration of Tao. If one day this cave was moved to the center, they could see all the details of the process of Master Hidden Dragon becoming an immortal. For the cultivators who planned to achieve integration of Tao, this was the biggest lucky chance. Of course, this kind of thing could not be confirmed. The cultivators of the interior heaven had not studied the rules of the entire ancient site for hundreds of thousands of years. It was as if it was just random. Some ancient sites had shown their divine signs more than 10 times in hundreds of thousands of years, while others had not shown their immortal signs even once. For example, the Hidden Dragon Mountain had its own interior heaven, but it had not moved to the center even once. Therefore, it was also known as a dead site. Few people would come to occupy it. The truly powerful people would occupy the most active ancient sites. Only then would they have the opportunity to observe it closely. Moreover, in the process of approaching the center in the last few decades, the original site would show some miracles. It was a lucky chance that cultivators could only come across by chance. You don't have to worry about these. Just a few decades ago, the immortal sign showed up. If you want to wait for the next one, you have to wait for 300 years. Therefore, this period of time is the most peaceful period of the interior heaven. No one knows which immortal mountain the next immortal sign will appear on, so there is no way to fight for it. You also have a lot of time to familiarize yourself with this place. The reflecting mirror wall also reincarnates every 360 years, and 50 people go each time. It also changed a few decades ago. At least for the next 300 years, it has nothing to do with you. That's why I said that you're lucky to have come to the interior heaven. You don't have to worry about these things. Lu Xiaoyi smiled awkwardly. I'm a newcomer. I may not even be able to officially enter the interior heavens list. Lu Jiang interrupted him. You can come in, so you're an interior heaven being. You can't hide from it, so why hide? It's fate. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. I'm not hiding. I just feel that it's a little unbelievable. Since when can a person like me, whose realm is not high enough, And who hasn't even taken the first step? Enter a place as high as the interior heaven. Isn't this passing off fish eyes as pearls and making up the numbers? The heavenly axiom has opened its mouth too wide. Isn't it a little indiscriminate? Lu Jiang glanced at him again. His words made him feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. No, you've already taken the first step. It's just that because the ancient method of cultivation is too special, you didn't feel it. Think about it carefully. Did you have any strange experiences in the process of your cultivation? You've already taken the first step of the 3 steps of immortal ascension. That's why the interior heaven has tacitly acknowledged you. It's not because it's old and muddle-headed. Lu Xiaoyi's heart was greatly shocked. His words woke him up from his dream. In the cultivation world of the main world, no one could see this clearly because no one understood. They didn't know what was the situation when a young spirit took the step of the ancient method. They just felt that this person's combat power was abnormally strong and outstanding in all aspects, which made people puzzled. But no one would think in this direction, and they had no experience in this area at all. But Lu Jiang was different. He was a senior half-immortal in the interior heaven. His current position in the hidden dragon cave didn't represent his position in the interior heaven. His eyes were sharp, and his insights were unique. He could see through this strange little cultivator at a glance. He was indeed a primordial spirit cultivator. But in the cultivation of the ancient method, there were too many unusual paths. It wasn't rare to cut off a corpse in the primordial spirit. More than 10,000 years ago, there was such a person who succeeded in becoming an immortal and integrated with the Tao of morality. Time flew by, and the heavenly axiom changed. Such cases were rare in the cultivation world in the past, but now it was becoming more and more common, and it was gradually spreading. More Supremes wouldn't be stupid enough to wait until they reached the yang spirit level to take this step. Instead, they would start to cut off their corpses when they reached the primordial spirit level. He had even heard of Yin spirits who took this step. This was the profound influence of the heavenly axiom on the cultivation world. It was also one of the many chaotic phenomena before the change of the era. Demons were born in troubled times. In this sense, he didn't find it strange that this little cultivator had taken this step in the primordial spirit level. Chapter 1700. Searching for spring all day without finding it. Straw shoes tread deep into the mountains. Returning occasionally to smell the plum blossoms. Spring is already somewhat on the branches. Lu Xiaoyi's thoughts turned rapidly because he had already realized the meaning behind this half-celestial's words. Compared to his own upper level of ancient technique, it was neither severing 3 corpses, nor joining path, nor portrait technique, but a universe fusion technique that he did not know the name of. There was one thing that he was very sure of, and even the time was very certain, and that was when he comprehended the 36 natural great Tao at the end of the epoch. That would be the day he ascended to celestial. The number 3 had a very special meaning in Taoism. For example, 1 gave birth to 2, 2 gave birth to 3, and 3 gave birth to all things. Another example was 1 chi turning into 3 pure ones, 3 flowers at one's prominence, 3 treasures, and so on. In fact, even the ancestors of cultivation only had 3, the 3 graces. Any more, and they would be forced into the negative space, and the mainstream would not acknowledge them. This also explained the meaning of the number 3 in Taoism. In the process of reaching the upper level of ancient technique, severing 3 corpses and Dantian 3 lights were all 3 stages before one could take the most important step. Actually, it was the same for other ancient techniques. The portrait technique also had 3 differences. Becoming a saint from the inner divinity also had to pay attention to the order of the 3 gods. It was the same for joining path. The 3 stages of joining path, and Tao were all closely related to the 3. This could also be considered a great common point for ancient techniques to achieve Tao. 3 was the greatest. In this way, Lu Xiaoyi's ancient technique of achieving celestial ascension with the 36 natural great Tao as the endpoint. Correspondingly, when he comprehended and fused the 12 natural great Tao of destruction, he was considered a first severance, just when his primordial spirit had reached great success. Then his second severance should be at the juncture of grasping the 24 natural great Tao. Comprehending the 36 natural great Tao completely was the third severance. In other words, when he actually comprehended the 12 natural great Tao and achieved primordial spirit, he was already a first severance. However, for some unknown reason, he himself did not feel this deeply. Was the first severance always like this? Or was there some other coincidence that he had not comprehended? But no matter what, the half-celestial environment like the interior sky had acknowledged his first severance. This was an indisputable fact. Was this the first severance? It did not seem to feel anything. Lu Xiaoyi's heart hesitated, a little in disbelief, but he understood that this was very likely the truth. It seemed like he had improved a little too much. Would he hurt his balls? The source of entering the Tao was one's own. Who knew about the news of transcendence? Seeing that he had closed his eyes and remained silent, Lu Jiang smiled. He was still too young to be able to reach this stage in such an ignorant manner. The joy of ancient cultivation was evident. It was much more challenging than the monotonous step-by-step cultivation of the blight state. It was also filled with the meaning of exploration. This was the true essence of cultivation. Since he was in a good mood today, he decided to say a few more words. The universe changes in a cycle. A man does not have 1,000 days of happiness, and a flower does not bloom for 100 days. If you don't distinguish the situation in the morning, everything will be for naught in the future. The sea has its ebb and flow. The mountains have their emptiness. The moon has its waxing and waning, and the sky has its winds. If the history of the cultivators in the universe was long enough, one would discover that there was no such thing as an unchangeable way to reach the upper level. Changing according to the situation was the right way of life. Then, the way to become an immortal in the blight state for millions of years was most beneficial to popularizing the foundation of cultivation and spreading Tao, but that was when the universe was calm and peaceful. Now that the Tao of heaven has collapsed and the universe is changing, will the method of reaching the upper level of the blight state still be mainstream? Lu Xiaoyi suddenly came to a realization. The universe changes. Of course, cultivators have to follow the changes. The blight state is no longer suitable for the current cultivator environment. The path of cultivation now is to fight for a chance of survival amidst the changes. When the era changes, not only will the universe's environment change, the cultivator's mentality and philosophy will also change. Therefore, before and after the era changes, ancient cultivation will flourish. Lu Jiang clapped his hands and laughed. The so-called ancient cultivation has no fixed rules. In short, as long as it is not from the blight state, even if it is created by you, it belongs to the ancient cultivation. What is ancient? If there is no path, I will pave my own way. That is ancient. This is the most basic philosophy of ancient cultivators. As long as you follow this philosophy, you will be a cultivator of the ancient cultivation. I can see that although you're ignorant, you're instinctively responding to the situation. Although you don't understand the reason behind it, you're doing it based on your intuition. This is your luck. That's why I said that it's not a chance for you to come to the interior heaven. It's just a matter of time. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior, you have great foresight. Your thoughts and considerations are thought-provoking. Unfortunately, in the cultivation world of the main world, there are not many orthodoxies that are truly aware of this point. They still follow the prescribed order and abide by the rules. Lu Jiang smiled. This is inevitable. It is inertia. Do you think that passing down this kind of information can change the trend? How can something formed over millions of years be so easy to change? However, there will always be people who go first, and there will always be people who follow the trend of the era. There are too many factors to determine who will be the leader of the future universe. But one thing is certain. He must be a cultivator of the ancient cultivation method. This is the return of the cultivation method under the change of the era. It is a trend. Only the keenest people can feel this change and adjust their own direction. Lu Xiaoyi had to admit that old Taoist Lu Zhang's words were reasonable. The inertia of history could not be changed with just a few big words. Just like how it took hundreds of thousands of years for the method of the declining state to become the mainstream. It was only after the majority of orthodoxies acknowledged that this method of the declining state was more systematic and systematic that it was truly recognized. If you were half a step ahead, you would be a god. If you were one step ahead, you would be crushed by the wheels of history. When would the ancient cultivation method truly return to the mainstream? There must be cultivators of the ancient cultivation method who shone brightly in this era and led the trend. It was not just one or two, but a large group of people who suddenly emerged to attract the attention of the entire cultivation world. It was not difficult to understand the profound principles of Taoism's mantra. It was only in silence. It meant that a cultivator's path could not be changed by a few words from others. It needed silence. What was silence? It was to shut the mouth and use the eyes, heart, and spirit to feel the changes in this world. In the end, change could be formed. Seeing that Xiao Xiao was still deep in thought, Lu Jiang pointed at him. In the current interior heaven, there are many people like you who took a step forward and crashed into it. There are yang spirits, primordial spirits, and evening spirits. To yang spirits, they are the normal upper realm, which is the body of a first severance half-immortal. Their lifespans cover the change of the era, and they are also the new forces of the universe. Needless to say, the remaining primordial spirits and Een spirits are of course the ducks who know when the spring river water is warm. You are the most sensitive ducks with unlimited future. You coming here may not have much to do with an old man like me, but between you, you are the real potential competitors. Who is the enemy? Who is the friend? Who can join hands? Who must be extinguished as soon as possible? You don't have to doubt that in the interior heaven, you little guys will be very lively. Chapter 1701. The conversation with Lu Jiang made Lu Xiaoyi feel deeply moved. He didn't expect that other than understanding the interior heaven, he also understood his own actual situation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a good thing to continue being ignorant like this. He suspected that the sword spirits of the three Qin had long seen through something. In his path of cultivation, it seemed that he had little involvement with his sect, Xin Yuan, but at every important juncture, there would always be power from his sect supporting him. At the most crucial moment, they would give him a push at the right time, including all the teachers in the dome, including Ninth Master, including Crow Ancestors' Sword Dao Tablet, including the ancestors of the three Qin. The power of inheritance was especially precious in a cultivator's growth. He was very glad that he had a powerful sect standing behind him. After several days of talking, there would always be a time when the fun came to an end. Lu Xiaoyi learned a lot and was grateful. Lu Jiang actually didn't have nothing better to say. In this chaotic world, forming good karma was very important. Who knew which cultivator would stand out in the future? For himself, and for his own orthodoxy. This young man looked like he had just come to the interior heaven. With his first explanation, it was fate that allowed him to get twice the result with half the effort. In the future, he might be able to use it. This news was both sad and happy for Lu Xiaoyi. He was happy because his actual realm was far higher than he thought. This meant that he didn't have to follow the prescribed order of origin spirit, then yang spirit, and then find a way to take the next step. This meant that the step of origin spirit had already overlapped with the first severance, and the step of yang spirit would also overlap with the second severance. This would greatly reduce the time of cultivation, and only after he understood his true cultivation level did he know that he had already stepped onto the fast track of cultivation unknowingly. Furthermore, it would be faster and faster. There was also bad news. For example, if the interior heaven recognized him as a first severance half-immortal, would he be trapped here forever? like those half-immortals trapped in the interior and exterior heaven. He wouldn't be allowed to descend until one day this balance was broken. There were still many things he hadn't done. He had to admit that when he found out that he was also a first severance half-celestial, a wave of confidence rose up spontaneously. This was unavoidable. It would be strange if a wolf could remain calm after being thrown into a tiger's den. However, if it found out that it was also a tiger cub, now it seemed that, according to Lu Jiang, there were quite a few tiger cubs in the interior heaven. Now that was interesting. For a long time, in the process of his personal cultivation, he rarely met any monstrous figures who were at the same level as him. Maybe Qing Xian was one of them. Now, he did not know where he died. For example, in Zhou Xian, Heaven's Choice, Hung River, and Anchor Chain, he didn't meet anyone who could talk to him as an equal. Once the gap between them was too big, they would naturally lose the possibility of interacting as an equal. It was a bit of a marketplace, but this was the eternal rhythm of the cultivation world. If they couldn't get along, there was no point in forcing them to be together. It had to be said that the universe was really too big. With his qualifications as a veteran cosmic traveler and his rich experience, how many places had he visited? 10% out of 100? In the thousands of years of showing off, he had never really come into contact with this level, the circle of monstrous figures. The water here was very deep. In fact, for most of the major forces and inheritances, they were very clear that the level that determined the future of the universe was not at the level of a true lord, but at least at the level of a half-celestial. This was because only when you reached the level of a half-celestial, you had the possibility of becoming a celestial. This was the most important thing that could determine the direction of the future. Therefore, for various reasons, porcelain should not touch tiles. No one was willing to let the absolute core of their cultivation fight to the death with a reckless swordsman. For most of the orthodoxies, the outcome of a battle could not determine anything, especially the orthodox Taoists. They valued the future more. Only when you become a celestial and obtain immortality, then you could truly stand on the stage. Otherwise, you would just be fooling around and a clown. Lu Xiaoyi had put in a lot of effort to come to the rescue of the mother planet, but in fact, he did not achieve any real goal. It was just a warm-up, a rehearsal. The major forces would not reveal their true trump card in such an occasion. Perhaps only the sword vein would tolerate their core seeds roaming the wild outside, promoting their cultivation through killing. In the orthodox view, they would not fight with you for a moment of anger. When the era changed, they would have become celestial, and you would not have. The difference between us would be obvious. Was there a need to fight to the death? Perhaps it was a bit of luck, or perhaps it was because Lu Xiaoyi's reputation outside was too great, which did not match the mainstream view of the monstrous circle. Therefore, he had always been excluded from this circle. He was allowed to jump up and down, and others would kill him without saying a word and take a step forward. Who would care about those unmentionable disputes in the main world? The higher one's ambition, the wider the stage. This might be the view of these true seeds towards Lu Xiaoyi. But now he was here too. No matter how he came here, he was here. The three Qin Sword spirits had put in a lot of effort to get him here. Who knew how much deeper their intentions were? In the conversation with Lu Jiang, he only asked about the general situation of the 3,600 celestial mountains. He did not deliberately ask about the specific location of the hanging wall eagle nest. Moreover, according to Lu Jiang's description, in fact, the specific location of a celestial mountain was not fixed. It was changing without any regularity, so it was useless to ask. This was the most basic principle of getting along with people. Lu Xiaoyi was willing to tell the truth, but if he really told the 8 generations of his ancestors, then he would not be honest, but stupid. He could not ask about the hanging wall eagle nest. Once he did, he would expose himself, who did not have a few enemies in the cultivation world, especially someone as iron-blooded and tough as the sword vein. It wasn't that he was afraid of any danger. With the space warp escape, he should be able to escape, right? What he was afraid of was that someone with ulterior motives would use him to set a trap for that ancestor. Anyway, judging from the situation, he would not be able to get out for a while. So he continued to explore. One thing was true. In the 3,600 celestial places in the interior heaven, there were all places where immortals, even real immortals, had appeared. To be chosen by such a person, the essence of the exterior in these scenic spots could be imagined. None of them were simple. He opened up his mind and knew that there were many new seeds like him in the last few hundred years. Therefore, he didn't think too highly of himself and just went on a scenic tour. This kind of opportunity was very rare. He didn't need to search for it in the mountains. Every one of them was genuine and full of immortal aura. He only saw the ancestor's image, but did not know his real body. However, since he was the first person in Xianyuan after the Crow ancestor, such a person, with the temperament of a swordsman, would not be unknown in a place like the interior heaven. If he could make a few more friends and chat with more people, it would not be too difficult to find the patriarch. That was what he thought. Chapter 17:02. Lu Xiaoyi wandered around the interior world in a more relaxed state of mind. He temporarily forgot his mission, responsibility, and burden. He only looked at everything with the mentality of a cultivator who pursued the great way. What he saw was different. Unlike the cultivation world of the main world, he was closer to the real immortal court here. It was so close that it seemed to be within reach. Legends of the immortals were everywhere. He knew very well that many of these legends were true and not fabricated. Not every immortal world had a half-immortal. Similarly, even if there were, they might not be willing to communicate with him like Lu Jiang. He also wasn't a flower that everyone loved. But even if there were those who did not like him, the most excessive rejection was just ignoring him. No one took the initiative to challenge him. It seemed that Lu Jiang was right. This period of time was indeed a rare, peaceful period in the interior world. Many half-immortals were still immersed in the realization of the immortals' performance decades ago. The future of the immortals was completely uncertain. Who would be willing to lower themselves to the level of a young man and increase karma? Of course, there were also those who were warm and hospitable. For example, after wandering around here for several years, he found that this mountain was not a mountain, nor was it a field. It could barely be called Mogan Hill. There was almost nothing here except for the lush tea trees that almost covered the entire gentle slope of the hill. There was once an immortal who called himself the Immortal of Tea, which should also be a Taoist. After several years, Lu Xiaoyi's understanding of the interior world became deeper and more detailed. Now, he acted like a master of the interior world. He no longer regarded himself as a guest. It was as if this was a place where he should be. The white porcelain passed through the quiet night, and the fragrance filled the leisure pavilion. There was no cave residence here. Digging a cave residence on the hill was like digging a mouse hole. It was very unartistic. Therefore, it was more suitable to build a house here. Even if there were only a few bamboo houses, it could be said that it was worthy of the tea mountains and clear water here. A Taoist brewed tea under the pergola outside the house. The three of them drank tea leisurely. Lu Xiaoyi had long understood the rules of the interior world. If he wanted to really integrate here, he had to bring his own immortal qi. His previous rough style would not work. Fortunately, his ability to adapt was very strong. Mogan's lush green world, 10 miles of bamboo shade, the fragrance of tea. Recognize this taste, find the supreme coolness. I happen to pass by. Can I borrow a wisp of tea fragrance? The three of them had long known that there were cultivators passing by. For a place like this was a very common occurrence. This was because Mo Gan Chio's Tea Dao Hall was originally set up to make friends with immortal friends. It had always been open and did not reject people. This was also the cultivation philosophy of the original owner of this tea mountain, the Immortal of Tea. This immortal was originally a tea farmer. Later on, he made tea for a living. It was unknown how he entered the Tao of immortals. In the ancient times, there were many such miraculous people everywhere. Two of the three Taoists were old men of interior realm. Only one of them looked younger, but like Lu Xiaoyi, he was in the primordial spirit realm. This proved Lu Zhang's words that he was far from being the only one in interior realm. There were many gods' favored sons ahead of him. One of the Taoists gestured with his hand. Light wine invites the bright moon. Tea is brewed to welcome newcomers. There is no empty seat in the day. Fragrant tea is available in the 4 seasons. Friends come from afar. Isn't it a joy? The few of them returned to their seats and chatted. Lu Xiaoyi finally knew their origins. The one who invited him to drink tea was the host, Taoist Shu Yu, and the guest was his old friend, Elder Shan Zhu. Both of them were first severing bodies after Yang's spirit, and were genuine interior realm half-immortals. The young primordial spirit cultivator was called Bei Feng. Like Lu Xiaoyi, he had special achievements in ancient techniques. However, his primordial spirit had already been severed into a corpse. Not only did he have good talent, but he also had good luck. He was a person who followed his fate. He had some connections with Elder Shan Zhu's orthodoxy in the main world. So when he came to Interior Realm, he also met many famous people under the guidance of this senior. This kind of cultivation method and networking method was very rare for Lu Xiaoyi. His friends were basically made by himself. Of course, so were his enemies. However, he had never had the experience of being brought out by relatives to introduce people from all sides. This was the difference between a wild child and a big family. However, in the cultivation world, this kind of method was more mainstream. On the other hand, Lu Xiaoyi's method was unconventional and vulgar, embarrassing the immortals. Fortunately, Lu Xiaoyi was good at pretending and could also make a few sarcastic poems. This was a style that was very recognized by his peers. He was a refined person and could be classified as part of the reserve army of immortals. Shu Yu asked, "Young friend, you look unfamiliar. You must have just entered Interior Realm not long ago, right? Are you here to drink tea or soup?" The tea ceremony in this cultivation world was actually very strange. There were brewing methods that were similar to Lu Xiaoyi's in his previous life, and there were also more colorful methods of boiling tea. The so-called drinking tea was basically similar to the tea ceremony in Lu Xiaoyi's previous life. The host question was actually asking him if he was here purely to drink tea and chat about Tao techniques. The so-called soup was a drinking method that was popular in some realms. It was a hodgepodge where many messy things were mixed with tea leaves and boiled together. For example, salt, ginger, all kinds of medicinal herbs, and even chili peppers. As long as you could not think of it, there was nothing that they did not dare to put in. Shu Yu's question had a double meaning. It was to ask if he had other motives for coming here. Was it as impure as the soup? He obviously did not prepare the ingredients for boiling the soup. He only had a handful of new tea leaves and a copper pot. So what he meant was that if he had other motives, then he should leave. This was a place for chatting, not for settling disputes. Cultivators, especially Orthodox Taoists, always spoke in such a roundabout way. They thought that this was the temperament of an immortal. Of course, no one knew what an immortal's temperament was. Lu Xiaoyi was very humble and low-key. A cup of tea quenches thirst and stimulates saliva, accompanied by a profound theory. It is meaningful and memorable. Without the spiciness of ginger and without the taste of salt, this is the real purpose of this junior's visit. Elder Shanju looked at him with a smile. "Little friend, tea?" Lu Xiaoyi was very embarrassed. "Yes, I drink it occasionally to pretend to be a story and to be perfunctory to the elders. Comparatively speaking, this junior likes wine more." The two old Taoists laughed. What kind of cultivation did they have? Even though they were separated by space, they could smell the strong smell of wine in one of Lu Xiaoyi's storage rings. There were also all kinds of cooked meat and incense. But this was not important. What was important was the attitude. He was honest and not pretentious. Just based on this honest statement, he was qualified to drink tea and listen to the Tao. As for drinking wine, in the cultivation world, drinking wine was not less than drinking tea. It was also accepted by the mainstream. There were real immortals in tea and immortals in wine. Chapter 1703. Lu Xiaoyi was wearing a pair of ears here. This was a habit he had developed since he came to the interior heaven. If you know something, you know it. If you don't know it, you don't know it. If you don't know something, you have to learn to listen. This was a good habit, until one day, when he opened his mouth, others couldn't help but have this good habit. Shu Yu and Shan Zhu continue to talk about the 5,000 years, the upper and lower worlds. They talked about the situation of the main world, their views on the changes of the era, the advantages and disadvantages of the interior and exterior heaven, the enlightenment of the immortals, the gains and losses of the mirror image wall, and of course, the evaluations of people. They were old friends who hadn't seen each other for many years. To cultivators, many years might be at least 100 years. They had too many common topics to talk about, too many changes in people, ups and downs, gains and losses. They didn't care about the feelings of the two juniors. After all, in terms of accumulation, the young people were still too far behind. Although their cultivation level rose very quickly, they were too fast. Everything else was fine, but in terms of insight, knowledge, and accumulation, they would never be able to compare with these two old fellows who had lived for more than 10,000 years. Therefore, the young people just pricked up their ears and listened. For them, there weren't many opportunities like this. Very few old half-immortals would let the young people listen to them talk freely. In a sense, at their level, the so-called martial arts and secret arts were not important. They all had their own paths that needed to be explored independently. However, the understanding of the general trend of the universe couldn't be separated from the advice of these old men. The wisdom of the old men was often shown here. They rarely opened up new paths, but they had an incomparable advantage over the young people in terms of the accumulation of time. Lu Xiaoyi listened to these. As for his martial arts and swordsmanship, who could teach him now? Even a crow ancestor couldn't. The North Wind was the same. However, he was still secretly observing this guy who had just arrived at the interior realm. This was a subconscious behavior, because in the current cultivation world of the universe, their real competitors were in their circle of so-called geniuses. The universe was so big that it couldn't be studied thoroughly. No one could travel the universe. Would an old half-immortal in the later stage, who was close to becoming an immortal, dare to say that he could travel the universe 10%? It was hard to say. Many of the ultimate mysteries of the universe could only be explored after one became an immortal and had an endless lifespan. Similarly, it was impossible for such an event to gather the cultivation geniuses of the entire universe, the pursuers of the great Tao, and the trendsetters of the times. It was simply impossible. Most of the time, it was a gathering of people from different sky regions. Otherwise, by the time they reached their destination, the youngsters would have already become the elderly, and the tidebreakers would have become the old scavengers. However, the interior and exterior skyscape provided them with a realistic and feasible place to gather. Considering the change of eras, the upper realm pathway was undergoing substantial changes. In other words, the interior skyscape became the only place for their circle to go. There's no need to set any conditions. The fact that you're here proves that you have the strength. There was no need to send out a request. Those who knew would naturally know. Those who didn't know would be useless even if they were told. This was a genuine and honest meeting of the future. Bei Fengming was one of them. He had been in the interior skyscape for more than 200 years and had experienced the major events of the interior skyscape. The immortals had announced that he had been there. Although he was a little far away and couldn't see it, he could still feel it. He had avoided the round of the reflecting mirror wall purely because of his lack of strength. Compared to these old half-immortals, there was still a practical gap between them and these old half-immortals. He had to admit the gap, but what he should see more was that this gap was rapidly being closed. It was precisely because of this experience that he could reluctantly consider himself as an old man in the interior skyscape, especially the person next to him, who looked like he had just entered the interior skyscape not long ago. His face was full of confusion, and everything he heard was new to him. This group of people covered a wide range of areas, including those who had just entered the upper yang spirit realm and those who had taken the first step in the primordial spirit realm. There were even peerless geniuses who had begun to show their talent in the yin spirit realm and had taken one of the 3 steps to becoming an immortal. In short, there were those who didn't walk the normal path, excluding those mediocre people who had been in the yang spirit realm for thousands of years and finally took another step forward with great difficulty. It was a bit of an exaggeration to say that these half-immortals who walked the normal path were mediocre, but in fact, this was what their circle thought. Because compared to this kind of method, which seemed normal in the past, their circle's advantage was that they had saved thousands of years. The universe belonged to everyone, but in the end, it belonged to them. No one sent out such an invitation for everyone to gather in the interior skyscape. But as long as you did take this step, you would definitely gather here. Because one's cultivation had already reached this level, there was something in the dark that was pushing you up, no matter how it was shown. It was forced, it was accidental, it was opportunity, it was willing, it was ignorant. Since you had already taken the first step in the ancient method, everything else would naturally follow. Especially in the past few hundred years, the great Tao had continuously collapsed. Now, 12 great Taos had collapsed, which was more than 30%. Those that should change had already begun to change, and those that should come up had already come up. If a cultivator still couldn't make sense of the general trend of the universe and was still in a dilemma between the Blight realm and the ancient method, then such a person would basically lose the capital to compete for the universe in the future. It was already a bit too late to realize it now. Therefore, it couldn't be said that it was absolutely everyone, but most of the people who had the qualifications to speak out in the future of the universe were here now. If this was a Dharma assembly, the heavenly Tao would be the convener. The stage would be the change of the universe and the collapse of the great Tao. Among this group of people, Beifeng belonged to the category that was neither early nor late. Before him, there were many monsters who were more monstrous than him. And after him, there were also people who were slower than him by hundreds of years, such as the person in front of him now. The problem he was facing now was that even if it was the circle of monstrous geniuses, there were other circles within the circle. This was inevitable. The cultivation world was like this, the immortal court was like this, and so were the half-immortals like them, because they weren't one person who didn't represent a powerful sect or force behind them. Was it a combination of the strong and the strong? Or was it a combination of the strong and the weak? Was it based on the distance between them to decide their closeness? Or was it based on the orthodoxy? Or was it due to historical gratitude and grudges? But there was one thing, and that was that each of them had a certain amount of decision-making power. They weren't the so-called elites in the traditional sense. They looked glorious, sounded awe-inspiring, and were sought after by people when they went out, but actually didn't enter the decision-making level. They truly had the ability to decide the direction of a sect or domain, because in terms of strength, they had already surpassed the level of a normal yang god. For most yang gods, they might not be able to take that step in their entire lives, but they had taken that step, which meant something. It meant the future of a sect or domain, and it was a real future. They were the future masters of the universe. Chapter 1704. Since he started to talk about circles, there were countless dirty things, countless interests, and countless open and secret struggles. There were many circles with different interests, big and small. Northwind really wanted to find out the background of this new Taoist. Which circle did he belong to? This was also a part of one's strength. If you had a group of like-minded people around you instead of being alone, you would have more power to speak. However, he couldn't simply interrupt the two seniors' discussion, nor could he suddenly ask the newcomer where he was from. Why don't you join our side? Naturally, cultivators paid attention to testing the other party's bottom line before the final flip of the card and judging the other party's attitude. When they opened their mouth, they wouldn't be rejected and lose their leeway. Therefore, they needed an opportunity. After a few days of talking, the two old guys finally turned the topic back to the interior heaven. After discussing the gains and losses of the immortals, they finally turned their attention to the newcomers who had just entered the interior heaven. Shui laughed. The wind of the universe is always changing. We've already passed away, and now it's the world of the young. They're not more than 3,000 or 4,000 years old, but they've already reached the first severance 10,000 years later. Thinking back, it's an unimaginable miracle. Sure enough, there's a huge change in the world. Talented people come out in large numbers, and the universe resets. Monsters appear frequently. Beifeng, let me ask you, among your group, how many have entered the interior heaven? The last time I talked to someone, it seemed to be 43. Beifeng said respectfully, Elder Yu, your information is outdated. 43 was the number 50 years ago, and now there are 61. However, the growth has slowed down in recent years. There's no one else other than fellow Taoist Yen. Those who should have come are all here, and there aren't many left outside. As his senior, Shanju spoke very bluntly. Of course, it was also possible that he was putting on airs for him. He knew the juniors he brought with him. Over 60? That's a lot of people. How do you plan to solve the conflict between Tao realms? In your small circles, even I'm tired of listening to them. It's hard for you to still enjoy it. Beifeng smiled and said, We don't want to either. If the heavenly axiom didn't just give us 36 innate Tao pits, but 360, who would ponder all day long. Let's each pick one. You're good. I'm good. Everyone is good. As for the circle, wasn't it a tradition in the cultivation world? With you old seniors as the foundation, us latecomers can only follow the rules. Before we came to the interior realm, didn't it have countless circles? Buddhists, Taoists, sword vein practitioners, body vein practitioners, soul cultivators, and corpse cultivators. The circle is everywhere, not just newcomers like us. If you use this as an excuse, this junior will not accept it. Shan Zhu's eyes widened. We've been cultivating here for tens of thousands of years. It's normal for us to reject each other. You guys, the earliest people who came here were only 600 years ago. In just a few hundred years, there are already so many circles? Northwind explained, Senior, you can't talk about a mere few hundred years. Yes, we came here early and late. Most of us only have a few hundred years of experience in the interior realm, but what we have to bear is more than a few hundred years. Even tens of thousands of years would be considered a little, right? Everyone has their likes and dislikes, and there are close and distant relationships. These personal relationships can be overcome. We have cultivated to our current level, and we're not the kind of people who haggle over minor matters. But there are some things that you can overcome, that you can't turn a blind eye to, especially those that are related to the history of cultivation. Let's take us as an example. Other small circles are insignificant. Let's just talk about the 4 divisions of the universe. Is this something that we can avoid? Lu Xiaoyi listened with interest. There was a lot of information in this. The universe was boundless, but even if it was, cultivators could still divide it. This division was the 3 enclosures and the 4 divisions. In the Taoist system, the universe was divided into 5 systems. The azure dragon in the east, the white tiger in the west, the vermilion bird in the south, the black tortoise in the north, and the yellow dragon in the middle. The yellow dragon here represented the immortal court, where the 3 enclosures were located. The so-called enclosures meant city walls. The 3 enclosures were the purple enclosure, which represented the imperial palace. The supreme enclosure represented the administrative institutions, and the heavenly market enclosure represented the bustling streets and markets, which represented the prosperity of the immortal court. Outside the 3 enclosures were the 4 divisions: the azure dragon in the east, the white tiger in the west, the vermilion bird in the south, and the black tortoise in the north. The east, west, north, and south here were not the actual east, west, north, south, but generally referred to the projection of the immortal court in the main world, the center of the yellow dragon, and the 4 directions that spread out infinitely. They were actually infinitely large, dividing the entire infinite universe into 4 similarly infinite directional starry sky regions. Each starry sky region had countless cultivation realms and celestial phenomena. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know much about the other star regions, but he knew that the blue sky and the 5 rings belonged to the Azure Dragon star region. However, Zhou Xian didn't belong to that region, but belonged to the Black Tortoise region. As for where the Hung River and the Anchor Chain belonged to, he wasn't too sure. The first darkness in the universe was the Earth domain. It was the same no matter where it was. Whether it was the cultivation world or the mortal world, whether it was this world or his previous life, they were all the most ancient opposites. Then there was the darkness of the Tao orthodoxy, the darkness of the realms, and all kinds of darkness. How did the darkness of each other come about? The distance of each other's territory and the entanglement of interests. If one was close, there would be conditions for darkness. If one was too far away, there would be no place for darkness. However, if one looked at it from the perspective of the entire universe like the interior heaven, the ways of darkness were limited. One of the most important things was, where did you come from? Just like in Liu Xiaoyi's previous life, were you from Asia or Europe, America or Africa? After discussing the larger scope, then which country did you come from? Then it was further divided. Shu Yu found it very funny. So, you've already divided the east, west, north, and south? I'm also very curious, among the 4 symbols heavens, which one has more talents? She had scratched Shua Tian's itch. In the past few hundred years, there have been a total of 62 people, including fellow Taoist Yin, who took a step below the Yang spirit realm and took a step at the same time. Among them, there are 16 people from the East Azure Dragon, 17 people from the West White Tiger, 14 people from the South Vermilion Bird, and 15 people from the North Black Tortoise. These are definitely not all of them. However, we estimate that the number of people who stayed in the main world and didn't come up due to various reasons will not exceed 10. With the development of the heavenly Tao's general trend, there will definitely be latecomers. However, if they want to make a difference before the era changes, the time left for them will be a little too late. Only this group of people is most likely to take the last step at the moment when the era changes. Of course, there are a few exceptions. Shanju nodded and sighed. It's very average. The heavenly Tao is fair and impartial. However, more than 60 people are a little too many. In addition, there will be more people coming up in the future. You children of the great Tao have quite a few conflicts, right? Chapter 17:05. North Wind nodded helplessly. There's no other way. There are 36 great Taos, but there are always difficulties and difficulties. Now, most of the great Taos are the 5 elements. Next is Yin and Yang, followed by slaughter. On the contrary, there are a few innate great Taos that no one has chosen. For example, Cheng Yun of the 5 luck, Dao Da of the 5 virtues, and Tai Yi of the 5 grand Taos. If someone's Tao unification is one of these, the competition will be much easier. Unfortunately, this kind of thing can't be changed by a cultivator's will. No one will choose a great Tao just because there are fewer competitors. Everything has to be done according to one's own conditions. I'm a primordial chaos cultivator, and my luck is not bad. No one is competing with me here. But I have a feeling that there must be someone who has also taken a step into the primordial chaos realm. It's just that he hasn't reached the interior realm yet. To be honest, I feel even worse if he doesn't come. When the universe changed and the great Taos collapsed, the upper realm of cultivators would also change. It was impossible to stay the same. Before the heavenly Tao began to collapse, the cultivators of that era were more flexible in their choice of Tao unification. There were also more ways to become immortals. There were many things to consider about self, and transcendence, good and evil corpses, condensing and summarizing the past, and yearning for the future. The final Tao unification only required one to choose a direction and fight with all their might during the 3rd slash. This was in line with the relatively unique cultivation environment at that time. Back then, there were no innate great Taos for everyone. Even if there were, there would only be 1 or 2 hidden among the 36 great Taos, making it impossible to choose. Therefore, the half-immortals at that time would basically choose postnatal great Taoists or create their own great Taoists to merge. Because there were no places for the best 36 great Taoists, the cultivators could only strengthen themselves in other aspects. On the contrary, they were more free to do as they pleased in Tao unification. Because no matter how hard you worked, you couldn't push a golden immortal down and take the top spot. But after the heavenly Tao began to collapse, the direction of immortal ascension was very clear. As long as one had a bit of ambition, they would definitely work hard toward the 36 innate great Taoists. With 36 Rujiamos placed there as a temptation, who would be willing to eat mixed flour sesame seed cakes? Therefore, the goal of this generation of cultivators was very clear. They only had one goal, and that was to merge with the innate Tao. Since the goal was clear, of course, he had to make his move early. From the start, the true monarch had determined his goal. No one would be stupid enough to look left and right among the 36 great Taoists and end up with nothing. Everyone had to set a goal early and bet everything on it. This was the correct way to rush to the top. Even someone as strong as the Crow ancestor was immoral. But judging from the Crow ancestor's narration, he had only truly begun to consider the direction of his own Tao integration after he had advanced to the second severance. He had gone to the Heaven's Choice continent to search for great Tao that had yet to be integrated by others. And in the end, he had been fortunate enough to find Tao Da. This was the rhythm of his era. And it should be like this. It was not advisable to search for the direction of Tao integration too early. Times were always changing, and the current era was no longer the era of Crow ancestor. 12 innate Taoists were empty, and they would continue to be empty in the future, until all 36 were empty. Because the matter was clear, there was no meaning in trying to integrate Tao now. After you had spent several thousand years of foolish effort to integrate an innate Tao, when the era over there restarted, fine, it would be in vain. All those with ambition planned to integrate the innate Tao that they had set their sights on and prepared for countless years after the era changed and when a new cultivation world was reestablished. Only in this way would they be able to obtain long-term benefits. At least in the next several million years after the next era changed, they would be able to secure the status of a golden immortal. In the cultivation world, there were innumerable capable people who were daydreaming like this. But without question, this group of people who could come to the interior heaven now was the most promising. There were many who were immersed in seclusion in their own realms of the main world, hoping to soar into the sky after the era changed. But they were actually frogs at the bottom of a well. They didn't understand that from now on, they were actually excluded from the ranks of the competition. While they were still obediently and step by step from Yin spirit to nascent spirit, and then to Yang spirit, and then thinking about whether to take the step of the decline state or the ancient path to take the next step, the most monstrous existence had already taken the first step when they were still Yin spirits. It sounded crazy and unreasonable to start thinking about the direction of Tao integration when they were perfected monarchs, but it was the most correct direction in this era. Therefore, those who came to the interior heaven and took the first step all had a clear goal for their future Tao. This was the gap between them. The heavenly Tao always favored those who dared to be the first in the world. Of course, they had to know their limits. If they were too first, they would be an outlier and become a stepping stone for others. To become the final winner of the innate Tao, the prerequisite was that they were strong enough, or they could eliminate the other competitors. Therefore, North Wind was very regretful because his competitors were still a mystery and he didn't know where to start. Fellow Taoist Yin, you're new here. Don't tell me you're also planning to integrate Origin? North Wind laughed dryly. Lu Xiaoyi also laughed dryly. Don't worry, fellow Taoist. I'm not interested in Origin. North Wind laughed awkwardly. Of course, it wasn't this person. If they were both Origin, he and this person could sense each other. However, this person should be an Origin who was supplementing his cultivation. He could sense it, but he didn't know what his main cultivation was. Shu Yu humphed and said, "Pay attention to the situation. I see what you two mean. If you're both Origin, you'll have to fight here." This is Shu Yu's Ti Dao, a civilized place, not a place for you greenhorns to fight. Only I'm easy to talk to. If I were in another place and had a bad temper, I have to teach you guys a lesson. It sounded like he was angry, but he was actually warning them that the interior heaven was not their world. There are many first and second severance old cultivators. Although the direction of Tao had been set long ago and couldn't be changed, it was very difficult to pose a threat to these young people. However, before these young eagles were fully grown, they could still beat them up. Shanju was all smiles and finally brought up the main topic. Although little friend, Yin is new to the interior heaven, I'm afraid you can't avoid this circle. Actually, no matter where one is, they can't avoid this kind of circle. It's for competition and also to settle down and settle down. Lu Xiaoyi knew that he couldn't pretend to be confused anymore. Sooner or later, he would have to say it. There was no such thing as sitting on the fence. I should belong to the East Azure Dragon, but I don't know if there's any conflict with fellow Taoist North Wind here. North Wind was slightly disappointed, but fortunately, although they belonged to different camps, they weren't enemies. The Elephant Heaven he belonged to and the Northern Black Tortoise were the most at odds with each other, and this was all caused by history. I belong to the Southern Vermilion Bird and can be considered a close neighbor. Chapter 1706. Although they didn't become a family, they didn't become enemies either. This was a blessing in disguise. Lu Xiaoyi was curious. Since we're here in the interior heaven, it's important to observe the immortals and cultivate one's character. The circle is all about one's heart. If you think about it, then it's not there. It couldn't be that they really had a fight to the death here, right? Besides, even if we do, what can we do? The universe is so big that there won't be any other competitors? I don't think so. If the heavens lose their deer, all the heroes will chase after it. But this kind of competition between individuals without considering the influence of the orthodoxy might not last long. It's a bit pointless. North Wind retorted. In the path of cultivation, there's only one word: fight. Yes, unless I kill everyone in the universe, I won't be able to completely cut off the competition. But this isn't a reason for you to not fight. Fighting is attitude. The heavenly axiom is watching. All living beings are watching. The heart is watching. When the heavenly axiom sees that you don't fight, it has no reason to favor you. The universe is changing and the epoch is changing. Do you think it's possible for you to wait for a pie to fall from the sky? When all living beings see that you don't fight, you'll lose your glorious momentum. It's for harmony. No one will follow you, and no one will follow you. In the long run, it'll be difficult for you to make your own voice heard, let alone talk about the future. What's there to talk about? The heart is watching. Humans are lazy. If you don't fight once, you'll fall into a state of not fighting every time. Then why did you come to the interior heaven? Wouldn't it be safer to stay in the cave of your own domain? So, fellow Yin, don't think that these people are country bumpkins who haven't seen the world. They'll lose their dignity when they see a piece of meat. To us, they're a group of gluttons who have been starving for thousands of years. They're really lacking in meat. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care at all. What I mean is, we can't have a group fight in the interior heaven, right? There are so many elders and a harmonious and stable environment. Let's mess things up and implicate the people close to us behind us. North Wind proudly smiled. Cultivators of my generation are all beyond immortals who have taken a step forward. How can we learn from those fools from the lower realms and fighting groups? Of course, we have our own rules. No one would help him. Everyone had to fight for their own future. For example, if I had a dispute with fellow Taoist Yin here, the two seniors wouldn't intervene. This is the rule of the interior heaven. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. I'm from a small place and have no guts. Please don't blame me. Lu Xiaoyi finally had the chance to learn about the inside information of the interior heaven that was closely related to him. No matter where a person went, he always needed such an environment and friends. Even if they could not live and die with him, it was still good to chat with him. It was also a part of cultivation. Life is not a black and white world. It is colorful. There must be friends who will go through life and death together, and there will also be enemies who cannot live under the same sky. However, most of them are those so-called wine, meat, tea, zither, chess, and friends who benefit from each other are equally important. When Lu Xiaoyi decided to join a small circle, he had the ability to do so, being experienced, humorous, honest, and not putting on airs. When you can do all these, it is actually not that difficult to get along with people. After getting familiar with each other, they were more open with their words. In fact, they did not report their domain sex to each other. It was meaningless. They were in different celestial spheres and were too far away from each other. There was no big connection in history, and of course, there was no resentment between them. Since Junior Brother Yin has just arrived, what is your goal? What are your plans recently? Bei Feng asked casually. The four people's tea talk slowly turned into two old guys reminiscing about the past, and two young guys planning for the future. This was the difference between the old and the young. It was unrealistic to expect old half-immortals like Xu Yu and Shan Zhu to compete with young people for the 36 innate great Taos. Giving up tens of thousands of years of persistence to change oneself for some purpose was also not the way of cultivation. There was one thing that must be understood. Even if the era changed, it did not mean that there were no other opportunities except for the 36 positions. In fact, if one did not seek to reach the top of the golden immortal realm, there were still countless paths for a cultivator to choose. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. There is no fixed place to go. We just wander around and familiarize ourselves with the environment. When your senior brother Shuo came to the interior realm, did he have a goal? Let's take a look around first. If we're lucky, we might meet a senior from the sect. Bei Feng nodded his head. Finally, this guy was willing to tell the truth. In fact, almost all of the so-called evildoers in the interior realm had roots. Cultivators without roots would not have been able to come to this place. In the so-called cultivation, the inheritance of the orthodoxy behind it was very important. It could determine a cultivator's vision and would not be limited to the area in front of him. Therefore, there were very few rogue cultivators who came to this place. Even if there were, they had roots. It was just that some unforeseen events happened later on. Therefore, it was normal for there to be ancestors or seniors in the interior realm who were recorded in the history of the sect. It was just like how he was with Shanju. This matter can only be done slowly. It can't be rushed. Many of the cultivators from the lower realm who came up here concealed their identities. This place is not a place to show off. Even if the interior realm has existed for millions of years, no one has a detailed roster of the interior realm. Maybe the immortals have it, but it has nothing to do with us. Bei Feng knew when to advance and when to retreat. He knew what to ask and what not to ask. It was both polite and to avoid karma. It's like this: the collapse of the Great Tao and the collapse of 5 innate Great Taos a few decades ago. 12 of the 36 Great Taos are gone. This is a watershed. It means that the changes in the universe have entered a new stage, from the early stage of the change of eras to the middle stage. I'll be honest with you. If you can't take a step into the interior realm now, you won't have much of a chance in the future, because time waits for no one. If you become a talent later, you won't be able to make it in time for the change of eras. It's hindsight. Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. For cultivation, rhythm was very important. Not only was it one's own rhythm, but it was also how to adjust oneself to the rhythm of the universe's changes. You had just comprehended the Great Tao, and the epic had changed, so you could only watch on helplessly as those second severance cultivators who had been preparing for a long time fought over the sweetest fruits of Tao. Thus, if a first severance cultivator appeared in the future, their accumulation in time would be very rushed, and in the end, it would affect their future achievements. It's precisely because of this concept that we feel it's time to hold a spiritual conference. At the spiritual conference, we'll settle some things that are very important to us. This spiritual conference will be hosted by a few respected second severance half-immortals of the interior realm. Would fellow Yin be interested? Chapter 1707. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Another meeting with Fa Hui, but it wasn't an assembly and was more like a place for young people to show off their strength. Gathering these people together, isn't that just looking for trouble? North Wind sneered. Not gathering together means not looking for trouble. If they gather together, with a few seconds severance great elites holding the fort, they can at least control the situation. Junior brother Yan, I see that you seem to be very averse to fighting. That's not good. In this circle, the weaker you are, the more people will take advantage of you. Lu Xiaoyi was slightly amused. He was indeed very averse to using this kind of method to decide things, because this would make it very difficult for him to control his actions. He was very clear about how heavy his attacks were. Once the battle began, he would immediately disregard everyone. But in this kind of place, was there any space for him to act without restraint? Would it bring trouble to the Grand Elder? Most importantly, would this bring new enemies to the Fifth Ring City? The direction of his Dao integration couldn't possibly conflict with anyone, unless there was someone like him planning to capture all 36 natural great Dao in one fell swoop. So, pretending to be a coward wasn't necessarily a bad idea. At least, he had to first complete the mission entrusted to him by the three Qins. He wasn't very interested in the contents of the gathering of these prodigies. He was more interested in these people, and also the connections that he had to expand. Go, of course I have to go. It's always good to get to know a few more people. North Wind was not surprised. It was impossible for anyone not to go to such an occasion. Not going in itself was the embodiment of a lack of intelligence. Was there anyone here lacking this? All right, set the time, 10 years later. The location will be at the Flying Crossing Stream, a very famous immortal world in the interior heaven. Practically everyone knows about it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. I just don't know. North Wind laughed loudly. Don't worry. Although the operations of the 3,600 celestial sects of the interior heaven are all irregular, before the start of the conference, there will be a second severance great cultivator giving a signal, and the surrounding cultivators of the celestial sects will respond and pass on the message. Very soon, the message will spread throughout the entire interior heaven. At that time, the path will be clear. Otherwise, to say nothing of you, even I would not be able to find the true location of the Flying Crossing Stream. Lu Xiaoyi took the opportunity to ask, speaking of the immortals, I think the interior heaven is good in everything except for one thing. The 3,600 realms are rotating without order, and there's no fixed number. It's really tiring to find someone. The North Wind shrugged. There's nothing we can do about it. I've been here for 200 years, but I'm still confused. I know what you want to ask. Do you want to ask how we found Shuyu Chachu? This really isn't our ability. It's Senior Shuyu who took the initiative to leave behind traces. She left behind traces everywhere she passed by the Tea Hill. That's why there are traces that can be found. If the owner is not so hospitable and is deliberately hiding it, then there's nothing we can do, other than finding it by accident or waiting for the celestial sects to appear once every 360 years. There's no other way. Lu Xiaoyi didn't get an answer, but he wasn't disappointed. He knew that this was a characteristic of the interior heaven. The higher the level of the cultivator, the more they cared about their privacy and wouldn't show it to outsiders. Unless it was a tradition like Shu Yu's tea ceremony, it was a minority after all, not mainstream. He changed the topic and asked a question that he was very concerned about. Senior brother North Wind, do you think that half-celestials like us in the past interior heaven should not have completely met the requirements of half-celestials? At the very least, our cultivation level is not enough. This is a hard indicator. Then, isn't it a bit too much to keep us here? When Shuyu heard this, she knew what he meant and what he wanted to ask. You want to know if you can leave the interior heaven, right? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. There are more things to do at home. It's not a problem to stay here for a few decades, but if you want me to stay until the change of the era, that's a bit too much. I'm not mentally prepared at all. Also, are we really half-celestials? We might not even have the confidence to defeat the sun god. If we're too high, we won't live up to the name. Shuyu nodded. This is indeed a problem. Back then, The immortal court restricted all half-celestials to the interior and exterior heaven because they were afraid that the half-celestials' combat power would be too terrifying. They would cause irreparable damage to the unstable main world, especially in terms of mentality. Lu Xiaoyi was stunned. Mentality? Shuyu nodded. Of course. You might not be able to feel it, but if we were to change positions, if you were a half-celestial who came up through the normal path of cultivation and worked hard to cultivate from the Yin spirit to the primordial spirit, then from the primordial spirit to the Yang spirit, then, after thousands of years of accumulation, you finally became a half-celestial. In the end, when the heavenly Tao collapsed, your future suddenly became bleak. Would you accept it? If you change your direction, it would be equivalent to denying your tens of thousands of years of hard work. If the past was wrong, how could you cultivate? If you don't change, you won't be able to eat the fattest 30 pieces of meat in the future era. After cultivating for tens of thousands of years, the most resplendent thing in the cultivation world has nothing to do with you? How many people do you think can calmly accept such a blow? Lu Xiaoyi understood. This logic was not wrong at all. If it had to be wrong, then it could only be described with one word: born at the wrong time. Shuyu continued. Everyone who comes here has a dream. No one comes here to be a salted fish. From a moment we chose the ancient method, it proved that we're the few people who dare to take risks in the cultivation world of the universe. But our risk was not recognized by the heavenly Tao because we took the risk too early. Most people will accept this fact. Although they might not be able to fit the innate great Tao, there will be other opportunities after the era changes. It's not that the situation will become worse, but that they are destined to settle for the next best thing. But there will be a small number of people who will be unsatisfied and lose their minds. If there are other reasons to stimulate them, it is very likely that they will do something irreversible in the main world. This is the real reason why the immortal court restricts us. Of course, the immortal court doesn't know who is truly willing to accept and who is secretly dissatisfied, so they simply wipe us out. No one can leave. Shanzhu also said, this is the situation of the interior heaven. In fact, the exterior heaven is even worse. Their way of becoming an immortal in the deteriorating state doesn't require them to integrate with the Tao, so they completely lose the opportunity to pursue the innate great Tao. So in the exterior heaven, there will only be more dissatisfied. Think about the terrifying number of exterior heaven half-immortals. Even if only a small number of them can't control their obsession, they will be an unstoppable force in the main world. Even the heavenly eye can't stop them. Unless an immortal descends to the mortal world, it will be a disaster. Therefore, the exterior heaven is more strict than the interior heaven. Shu Yu smiled. So you should understand that you are the ones who want to maintain the peace of the main world the most. You are the ones who don't want to be involved in the karma of breaking realms and destroying planets. So the immortal court actually has no reason to stop you from coming to the lower realm. This is our guess and may not be accurate. If you want a definite answer, in the interior heaven, perhaps only those second severance great elites can tell you, or help you. Chapter 1708. Sitting amidst the wild springs and white clouds, he loved this mountain. Lu Xiaoyi and a few interior sky old hooligans had been together for nearly a month. After drinking a bellyful of tea, he finally had a rough understanding of the interior sky and his future. He set a date with North Wind and sincerely thanked the two elders. No matter what their intentions were, they did not treat him as an outsider. This was friendship. Of course, this was also the essence of Shu Yu's tea ceremony. Of course, the old Taoist Shu Yu did not deny that nearly 30% of the monsters who came to the interior heaven had tea and chatted with him. Their purpose was actually the same as Lu Xiaoyi's. When they first arrived, they were probably in a state of treading on thin ice. Then, as time passed, they slowly began to be presumptuous. However, the old Taoist was very sensible. During the month, he had chatted with a few people, but did not mention a word about their background. It was clear that he had a bottom line and was trustworthy. Flying in the magnificent scenery of the interior sky, he sighed in his heart. In this world of great battles, there were many sensible people in the universe. He was not the only one who saw through the changes of the universe and made corresponding adjustments to his cultivation. There were many people who did the same, including more than 60 evildoers here, those who had not yet reached the interior sky and were sharpening their skills in the main world. Even old guys like Lu Jiang and Shu Yu were included, although the old guys did not say it, who dared to say that they would not have a place in the future of the universe. Would it not be useful? The older the ginger, the spicier the ginger. Who could cultivate the ancient methods and reach the interior sky did not have lofty ambitions. Now, he had two goals to achieve as soon as possible. First, he had to thoroughly understand the problem of his cultivation. He was now in the primordial spirit realm. This was not a problem. The problem was that he had now naturally taken a step forward because he had comprehended the 12 innate great Taos. It was equivalent to cutting off a corpse. But what was the benefit of cutting off a corpse? If he did not enter the interior sky and Lu Jiang did not remind him, he would not even know. This was the biggest joke in the world. How could a cultivator be so muddle-headed when he didn't even know about it after beheading the corpse? He was very sure that he hadn't obtained this kind of power after advancing to the primordial spirit tier. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't be so slow. So, there must be something that he had overlooked. Secondly, he had to find the hanging wall eagle nest. Only there could he find the ancestor of Xian Yuan, the famous demonic sword venerable in the cultivation world of the universe, Lu Zhu. Perhaps, if he found this person, his first problem would be easily solved. However, he still wanted to rely on his own strength to solve the problem. He was already used to exploring alone. This was a good habit, but in some specific cases, it would be inefficient. He was very clear about the gains and losses, but the problem was that no one could answer him. For this kind of matter, aside from the grand ancestor of his own sect, the pavilion ancestor who had been at the second severance for a long time, there was no second person who could help him. In a mathematical model, there were 3,600 immortals in a huge space, and each of them was moving slowly and irregularly. If you wanted to accurately find one of them, how much time would it take, excluding the factor of luck? Lu Xiaoyi's mathematical ability was very ordinary, but he had to admit that this was a depressing result, especially when he didn't open his mouth to ask. He didn't like to ask for directions, because opening his mouth would expose a lot of things, but the actual situation now forced him to open his mouth. At least, asking a cultivator station in the mountain would not be a problem for the landlord, and he wouldn't have to search for them one by one. This was also a method that couldn't be helped. Thus, he changed his usual cautious strategy. From another perspective, even if he opened his mouth, others might not be able to confirm anything. Maybe it was revenge? Maybe it was to repay a debt of gratitude? Maybe it was to ask for advice? In such a huge interior heaven, apart from the mortal world and 1,000 or 2,000 half-immortals scattered around, it was actually very spacious. He flew and asked questions. Because his attitude was modest and polite, and because half-baked primordial spirit half-immortals like him were very common in the interior heaven for hundreds of years, the actual situation wasn't as bad as he imagined. In the words of one of the old Taoists, in these hundreds of years, he had met more than 10 people like him who came to ask for directions. It looked like he wasn't the only one looking for trouble in the interior heaven. He ran for a whole 5 years, until he met a monk. This monk was very unusual because he didn't hide in the depths of the celestial mountain, but lingered in the mortal world at the foot of the mountain. He didn't wear monk's robes, but coarse hemp draped over his shoulders and exposed his feet in straw shoes. He didn't beg for alms either, but carried a large medicine chest on his back and traveled from village to village, not hiding his tracks and purpose at all. Whether it was real or not, at least he lived very realistically. To a cultivator, at the same time that he focused on his own cultivation, he could also take care of the mortals near his cultivation place. This was a kind of attitude much more practical than chanting Amit Ba countless times in the temple. Walk, stay, sit, lie, and lie down the pure heart is unmoved. The Tao field has truly become a pure land, known as Samadhi. Great master has a good foundation, worthy of admiration. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I'm asking for directions. May I know if you can give me some guidance? Lu Xiaoyi waited until the monk left before he appeared to ask. This monk's aura was unfathomable. He was probably his second severance, so he was a senior and needed to be respected. Buddha is a heartless Taoist. He doesn't cling to himself and doesn't distinguish between dharma. He has the heart to redeem all. So why should he distinguish between himself and others? Little friend, ask yourself, and there is no need to worry too much. You know, but you don't speak. Lu Xiaoyi bowed again. There's a high-hanging cliff, a flock of eagles building a nest, a lone peak standing upright, and completely uninhabited. Has great master seen such a celestial phenomenon? Lu Xiaoyi actually did not know the name of the hanging cliff eagle's nest. It was only manifested by the 3 Qin sword spirits. After entering the interior realm, he saw that celestial phenomena had their own wonders, and there was not a single similarity. Presumably, there would not be a second such phenomenon in that place. Yet the monk did not answer directly and only looked directly at him. I see that little friend's encounters are very strange. You understand Buddha and also kill Buddha. May I know the reason? As expected of a second severance eminent monk. Though Lu Xiaoyi's past could not be completely seen through, the general idea could not be hidden either. Lu Xiaoyi was not panicked. He had experienced this kind of questioning too many times and naturally had a way of justifying himself. Understanding Buddha is because Buddha and Taoism are one family. Since I've learned Tao, I should understand Buddha. 1 is 2, and 2 is 1. Kill Buddha? It's just that Buddha wants to kill me, and has no choice. The main world is chaotic, and there are all kinds of conflicts. Being in it, I have no choice. The monk sighed. How could he not understand all kinds of things in the main world? It was also a conflict of Tao, but if there had to be an instigator, it probably could not escape Buddhism. This was also a fact. Buddha teaches that people should cherish life. When flowers bloom on the same stem, they're all people. If one deliberately asks not, there is a true God 3 feet above one's head. The place that little friend is asking about should be the hanging cliff eagle's nest. This is a dangerous place, do you know? Lu Xiaoyi said firmly. I know. The monk nodded. Good words could not persuade a person who is seeking death. He pointed behind him. You pass by. Turn around and fly towards the rosy clouds. You'll arrive about a year later. Chapter 1709. From the beginning to the end, Lu Xiaoyi did not know the name of this senior monk. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, for someone to reach such a level, he could no longer measure these senior masters with the same standards as the Buddhism and Taoism of the main world. If he could see through it, there was no reason for the monk who had lived for tens of thousands of years to be so stubborn. This was also the reason why he killed the Buddha, but did not hate the Buddha. If the universe's cultivation was considered as a whole, Taoism and Buddhism were actually brothers. This could be distinguished from their ideology inheritance. There were differences, but there were also similarities. It was completely different from the different types of divinity in the Hengi boundary. The monk might not be able to see through his real foundation. Although he was only a primordial spirit, he was covered by the Great Way after the first cut. Moreover, the magic of his Sparrow Palace was very different from the normal sword pill technique of Xianyuan sword sect. Honesty should also have a sense of propriety. It was originally a good question and answer between monks and Taoists, but you had to use a fierce flying sword to test the limit of their tolerance. That was asking for trouble. Therefore, he turned back and flew towards the colorful clouds. He knew that he had to speed up. The location mentioned by the monk might not be completely accurate. It might just be a rough estimate because all the immortals were in a kind of relative motion. If the monk saw it early and he went late, he might miss it again. Who would believe that he had been looking for a place for more than 10 years? A year later, he entered the area mentioned by the monk. He carefully distinguished the tracks of the mountains in front of him. After pondering for a while, he searched in the most likely direction. 2 months later, a towering peak finally appeared in front of him. It was really not easy. To be honest, the hanging wall eagle nest shown by the three Chin sword spirits was very different from the actual terrain. It was understandable. After all, the three Chin sword spirits had never really been here. Perhaps they only vaguely had such a concept after hearing about it from the crow ancestor. Fortunately, when the three characteristics of a lone peak, towering peak, and eagle nest were combined, there was no need to worry about finding the wrong place. At least he had seen hundreds of immortals in the past 10 years. Basically, each one was unique and difficult to confuse. After circling the peak, he found nothing. There were no Taoist temples, no caves, and no traces of great cultivators. He wasn't discouraged. He directly descended and carefully examined it. In fact, the simplest way was to use his divine sense to communicate. However, he was a careful person. Up until now, he was not completely sure that this was the Lu ancestors' place of cultivation. If he came to the wrong place and called the wrong master, there would be a lot of trouble. It was better to observe in advance. After searching from top to bottom, Lu Xiaoyi was once again certain that there was no such thing as a cultivation abode. This kind of situation was not uncommon in the interior heaven. According to Lu Xiaoyi's observation, 30% of the immortals he had seen were like this. It was also in line with the cultivators' feelings of advocating nature. With their bodies, they did not necessarily need to have any shelter. What puzzled him was that there was no immortal Qi, sword Qi, Tao Qi, or Buddhist Qi here. Instead, there was a faint and indelible demonic Qi. There were 3,600 immortals in interior heaven, and each person had 2 immortals. Would a swordsman need to find such a place to cultivate? Moreover, even after tens of thousands of years, it still couldn't erase that deep-rooted demonic beast aura. This could only mean one thing. The original owner of this hanging wall eagle nest was a demonic beast. Did he come to the wrong place? Did the three Chins remember wrongly? Or did he come to the wrong place? Or did the Lu ancestor change places long ago? He decided to go through it again in detail. He still did not find anything. For a cultivation realm like his, if he could not find anything even after doing this, it meant that there was nothing strange at all. Even 10,000 feet underground could not escape his perception. What else could be left behind? He was a little disappointed. After working hard for more than 10 years, he only got this in return. However, he still would not leave because there was another way to help him understand the past here. That was the countless eagles that lived here. To be able to survive in the interior heaven, there were no ordinary animals. For these big eagles, it was not a problem for them to live for hundreds of years. Just the incomparably rich spiritual vigor here alone was enough to make even an ordinary species grow into a mutated species. However, the eagles were very alert. They had already left far away when this strange Taoist came up the peak. They were full of vigilance. He could not be too forceful, right? Lu Xiaoyi was a polite person. Since this was the place where demonic beasts became immortals, then there was naturally a high possibility that there were demonic beasts residing here. In Lu Xiaoyi's eyes, these eagles were feathered beasts, but in the eyes of demonic beasts, they were of the same race. On the contrary, humans were the hairless demons. At this point, he already did not have any hope of finding the Lu ancestor here. This was not a guess, but really did not feel the slightest bit of aura related to Xin Yuan. For a person like the Lu ancestor, with such a status, there was no need for him to hide like this. A second Severance Sword Immortal was at the top of the food chain here, so what was there to hide? He expanded the strength of his divine sense, and once again shrouded the peak. Inadvertently, he discovered a few strange demonic beasts at the waist of the peak. A small tiger and a few mountain leopards were sunbathing and sleeping on a protruding mountain rock. He could not see anything special about them. They were just ordinary demonic beasts. Yuanying realm was slightly stronger than those eagles, so there was a limit. Well, it would be good to ask them. At least he had to figure out the actual situation here. It was a very strange feeling. He descended, and the few demonic beasts immediately became alert and crawled up, but they did not run away. In the interior heaven, there were many half-immortal cultivators. Everyone was knowledgeable, so no one could scare anyone. They had their own way of getting along. Moreover, if they really had ill intentions, they could not run away. He felt around in his storage ring, planning to give them some benefits first before talking. He first took out some braised meat, but the few demonic beasts did not move at all. Well, were they used to eating fresh meat and did not like finished products? That made sense. Candies, treasured weapons, fine wine. He took out all kinds of things, but the few demonic beasts looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. They were not moved at all. This was a little awkward. He had not come into contact with the demonic beasts of the interior heaven. Could it be that the demonic beasts living here were now so cold and arrogant? The interior heaven was rich in resources, and they were all natural treasures. There were countless rare spiritual plants on the stone walls of the hanging wall eagle nest, and many of them were very old. Even he had not seen them before. It seemed that he was the bumpkin instead. Among the few demonic beasts' abnormalities, he still keenly discovered a trace of strangeness. It seemed that all the demonic beast behavior was based on the small tiger's eyes. There was actually a leader, but this leader was a little stupid. It actually wanted to ally with the earth demons to go against the cultivators. Or it could be that a real big demon was outside, so it had nothing to fear. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and pointed at the braised meat in front of him. I'll ask and you guys answer. You'll be secretive and not tell the truth. Do you see, my braised meat is almost finished, and I'm just short of chewy ingredients. Chapter 17:10. The few demons still did not accept his kindness, but they all hid behind the white tiger. He understood that if he did not kill this white tiger, he would not get any information. Or to put it simply, the truth was with the little white tiger. It definitely knew more than those killer leopards, and it was more complete. He wiped his face, and like a Sichuan opera actor, he became sinister and vicious. He stared at the little white tiger and approached it step by step. This was to create psychological pressure and destroy its willpower mentally. At the same time, he released his aura and said fiercely, "Little thing, what are you thinking in that little head of yours? How many lives do you have to go against a monstrous genius like me? Are you sure you have enough? You have such a big tiger head, but you don't have a brain. Let me teach you. Don't just train your body in the future. You have to use your brain more. When you see a hero like me, you have to tuck your tail between your legs, or you'll suffer." The little white tiger dug its paws into the ground and lowered its body, growling in a low voice. It seemed very dissatisfied. Lu Xiaoyi continued to approach, his expression becoming more and more sinister. Who's the owner of Eagle Peak? Where did he go? Are there swordsmen walking around? How many Eagle Peaks like this are there? If you tell me the truth, there will be countless benefits. Immortal pills, spear herbs, great Dao techniques, treasured weapons and talismans. I have everything. As long as you can't think of it, there's nothing I can't take out. If you answer my question correctly, I might even take you in as a divine guardian beast and rule over a region. By then, you can take whatever you want from all the female tigers in the mountain. But if you don't know how to appreciate my kindness, I won't kill you. I've recently brewed a jar of medicinal wine, and I'm lacking a rare ingredient as the main ingredient. I wonder if you're willing to give it to me? The little white tiger was not afraid at all. It only glared at him fiercely, as if it was about to swallow him whole. He could not help but sigh in his heart. These demons were so bad. They were stubborn and only knew how to fight with their lives. They did not know how to be flexible. He did not really want to do anything to it. He was just trying to scare it. He had cultivated for nearly 2,000 years, and he was very proud of one thing. He had never really bullied these natural creatures. But it should at least give him some face, right? Did it really think that it was the king of Half-Deity Mountain? With a stretch of his hand, a huge essence chi hand instantly enveloped the little white tiger and continued to intimidate it. Let's see how you're going to escape from my hands." The little white tiger still refused to lower its head in the face of the huge vital energy hand. Lu Xiaoyi didn't hold back either. He controlled his strength and grabbed down. He had to ensure that the little white tiger couldn't escape and couldn't really hurt it. To him, this kind of dermic power control was a little difficult. Perhaps the little white tiger only looked ferocious on the outside, but was actually frightened. Not moving at all, he was caught red-handed. As soon as the yuan qi touched the white tiger's body, Lu Xiaoyi immediately felt a strange devouring power. Although his yuan qi was not boundless, it was extremely pure in an instant. There was no stumbling at all, as if it was just drinking water. A chill rose from the bottom of his heart, spreading from his tailbone to his entire body. Even the large birds in the Sparrow Palace seemed to have difficulty flapping their wings. Lu Xiaoyi was such a sly person. He immediately knew where his mistake was. He didn't retract his outstretched hand and bowed down. Fourth ancestor, you're a little unethical. You're pretending to be a tiger to eat a pig. Are you trying to tease me? There were countless ancestors in Xianyuan, but there were only 4 people who were truly recognized as ancestors. The first ancestor, Xianyuan the Great, created when Guangfeng and was the ancestor of Zhongjian. The third ancestor, Jiang Hengzhou, created the graceful sword lineage. The fourth ancestor, Wei Ji, was the founder of Killing Sword. The last one was the 13th ancestor, the leader of Dao Sword. Among the 4 ancestors, there were 3 humans and 1 demon. Only the 4th ancestor, Wei Ji, was a strange white tiger. This was Xuanyuan's greatest secret, and was only vaguely mentioned when Lu Xiaoyi received the replica of Xuanyuan's scabbard. In this aspect, Xuanyuan's records were very vague, and it was only briefly mentioned. For some reason, Lu Xiaoyi didn't even think about it. He didn't think about it at all, because tens of thousands of years had passed. It always made people subconsciously think that these ancestors had long since become ancient immortals, so their consciousness would always revolve around the ancestors of humanity that were still alive. But when the Hand of Origin Chi failed, he immediately understood. This kind of strength could only be possessed by a second severance cultivator. As for lifespan, was life a problem for strange beasts? Who would have thought that this ancestor was actually idling around in the interior heaven? And so low-key at that? What he didn't know was that the white tiger had left Xianyuan for a reason, and some family matters were not good to comment on. By now, no one knew about it. Only the crow ancestor had come into contact with the white tiger at that time, and it was probably because of this relationship that the 3 Qins knew about this and recommended Lu Xiaoyi. So, it wasn't that the white tiger was really low-key and playing around with its juniors, but it just didn't want to have anything to do with Xianyuan. But it hadn't thought that this Xianyuan disciple would be so shameless, just like that person from 10,000 years ago. Xianyuan's sword sect had it been taken over by rogues and scoundrels? The white tiger looked coldly at this guy that had changed from arrogance to deference, an innocent expression on his face, as if the words just now hadn't come out of his mouth. My brain is small, and I don't understand what you are saying. Lu Xiaoyi's face was smiling like a flower, and he walked over intimately, sitting down close to the white tiger, even wanting to put his arm around it. Even if the white tiger moved away in disgust, he didn't care at all. Being so clingy and thick-skinned, he had definitely received Xuanyuan's true teachings. The size of the brain is not important, but the quality. A giant elephant has a big head and only knows brute force. A whale is huge and only needs 1 mouth. How can it compare to the body of my Xuanyuan's 4th ancestor, the white tiger, wise and far-sighted? Beneath the clumsiness on the outside, there is beauty hidden within. With the establishment of Xianyuan, the name of the Killing Sword spread far and wide, raising the might of my sword, suppressing the small, tens of thousands of years of foundation. Without the contributions of the seniors, would have been nothing but a dream. This disciple often reads the historical records and deeply regrets that I wasn't born in the same era as the 4th ancestor. I was willing to follow your tale and travel far and wide. Thinking back on the quiet night, I regret being born at the wrong time with bad luck. With such great achievements, you are willing to hide yourself and not be burdened by a false reputation. This heart of yours is truly admirable. This disciple's admiration for you, fourth ancestor, is like the torrential Milky Way, endless and never-ending. Hearing this, the white tiger felt goosebumps all over its body, and a chill ran down its spine. It couldn't understand how a person could be so shameless. I heard that you've brewed a jar of medicinal wine, and you're missing the main ingredient? I have one here, why don't you take it? Isn't it a waste to make use of it? Lu Xiaoyi was overjoyed. He thanked the white tiger profusely. Thank you, fourth ancestor, for your help. With you as the main ingredient, this jar of celestial wine is not in vain. If that's the case, this disciple will offend you. The white tiger only squinted its eyes, wanting to see how this scoundrel would justify himself. The scoundrel carefully approached the white tiger and even put on a pair of white gloves to show his hygiene. He came to the white tiger's tail and very gently plucked a strand of hair from its tail. He even rubbed it and blew on it, and only then did he hold it in his hands as if he had found a treasure. He then took out a jar of wine from his storage ring and carefully placed it in the jar. From now on, this will be my family heirloom. The white tiger's eyes widened. As expected, there was no limit to how shameless he could be. Chapter 17:11. Lu Xiaoyi tried his best to change the bad impression he had of the tiger. Damn it. How many years had it been since he had been so submissive and made compromises? Sigh. He couldn't blame anyone else. He hadn't thought things through. It was also the Three Chin's fault. Couldn't he have used his name? Would have killed him to write 2 more words? He had lost a lot of face, but the white tiger wasn't willing to let him go. How could such a rude and immoral person be a swordsman? And the only one in the last few thousand years who had reached the upper level of the ancient technique? The heavens were truly blind. The disgrace of the sword vein. It also knew that it couldn't win against this guy with words. No one could win against him unless they were more shameless than him. So it opened its mouth, and a tiger head instantly grew larger than a mountain. It opened and closed, swallowing Lu Xiaoyi, who had disgraced its ancestors. Then it lay down on a rock and went back to sleep. Lu Xiaoyi only felt that it was dark here. He couldn't tell east, west, north, south, up, down, or down. But he didn't panic. He was also a Xianyuan swordsman. If he couldn't tell what was real killing intent and what was just punishment at his level, then he would have wasted his cultivation. Stingy. Can't take a joke. Lu Xiaoyi complained to himself, but he didn't realize that he really wasn't joking at the beginning. This was the ancestors' punishment. It was similar to being locked up in a small black room. He had to accept it, so he didn't struggle at the beginning. In fact, with his ability, he was confident that he could dodge it. He was confident he could use this to appease the fourth ancestor's anger, who told him to threaten the ancestor to cut off his penis to make wine. It did seem a bit excessive. Was this the white tiger's natal space? It was very mysterious. Inside, he couldn't even use the spatial escape technique. He just didn't know whether he was in the tiger's mouth or not, or in the stomach pouch, or was it simply a special space? Should he try to get out? Or was being able to get out a condition to stop the punishment? He still couldn't figure it out because he didn't understand the fourth ancestor. He didn't know his personality, temper, likes and dislikes. The sect didn't seem to mention anything about this. He didn't know what he was afraid of. When he wanted to wander around, he suddenly realized that he couldn't move his body in this mysterious space. He really couldn't move, no matter what method he used. Things seemed to be getting out of hand. This white tiger's temper was very bad. Did it not want to let him off easily and let him suffer a little inside? To be able to make him unable to move at all, it must be some kind of suppression that he did not possess at the moment. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to do it so thoroughly. Based on strength alone, even an immortal wouldn't be able to make him stand still like a wooden stick. Presently, the difference between him and the white tiger was a difference of 1 level in each of the 2 levels. For example, in terms of cultivation level, there was the difference between life spirit and yang spirit, and in terms of ancient techniques, there was the difference between the first severance and the second severance. Then, what exactly was the difference that caused him to lose control of his own body? Only his body was affected. Everything else didn't seem to be affected. For example, the Sparrow Palace was normal, and the 7 ants were also fine. Just as he was racking his brains, the silhouette of a huge white tiger appeared in the distance. It looked exactly like the 4th ancestor, but it was much bigger and fiercer. There was even an extra pair of wings on its back. Black clouds were forming under its 4 paws, and the king character on its forehead was replaced by a star of the white tiger. As it ran, it looked around proudly, awe-inspiring. What was this thing? It was Wei Ji, and not Wei Ji. This thing was neither fast nor slow, but pounced straight at Lu Xiaoyi. It didn't slow down in the slightest, and its target was clear, full of malice. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but shout, "Hey, don't come over. If you come any closer, I'll treat this as an internal competition of the sect." According to the rules of Xianyuan, no one can invade another's body for no reason. The winged white tiger acted as if it didn't hear him and didn't care. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care about this. He'd have the habit of standing and being beaten. Even if you were the patriarch, he couldn't beat you without warning. At the very least, you had to take out the rules of the sect and set the punishment before it could be carried out, right? That was the only way to convince others. The flying swords gushed out and resisted the white tiger, but what disappointed Lu Xiaoyi was that this white tiger was just an illusion and couldn't be affected at all. Whether it was his flying swords, the Tao realm on the swords, or even the power of his faith, none of them had any effect on the white tiger's illusion. In the blink of an eye, while he was still mobilizing the flying swords to attack, the white tiger suddenly accelerated and crashed into his body. Ouch! You're going to kill Xiao. There was no substantial damage, but it caused his internal organs to shift, and he was in unbearable pain. This was the rhythm of using a wet whip to whip a criminal. If you're not going to die, you're going to be in pain. It wasn't over yet. He had just caught his breath when an identical winged white tiger appeared in the distance again. Obviously, it was going to continue crashing into him. Lu Xiaoyi shouted, "4th ancestor, this disciple made a slip of the tongue first, and it's only right for me to be punished. But before you punish me, you should at least tell me the amount of the punishment, right? You can't arbitrarily punish me and break the rules of Xianyuan." Shouting was one thing, but Lu Xiaoyi had learned his lesson this time. He didn't use the flying swords, but directly flew out of the Sparrow Palace's big bird. The big bird's roots were extraordinary, and it was the king of primordial sacred beasts. It was just right to deal with a monster like the white tiger. But reality disappointed him once again. The big bird just went straight through, and it seemed to have no effect at all. The white tiger didn't show the slightest bit of fear towards such a noble existence. Thus, he was once again hit until his mouth and eyes were crooked. Something was wrong. It was impossible for the Sparrow Palace's big bird to be completely useless, but such a strange thing had happened. Then Lu Xiaoyi muttered to himself, and finally understood the crux of the matter. It wasn't that the flying swords were useless, and it wasn't that the big bird had lost its power, but that this winged white tiger wasn't a tiger of the present, but a tiger of the future. It was the superego of the 4th ancestor Wei Ji. It didn't come from the portrait. It was the future of the past, present, and future. It was the superego of the superego. Of course, he couldn't slash it, because it wasn't on the same timeline. This wasn't a simple matter of seeing the other party's future and slashing it. That belonged to the category of human cultivators. Sacred beasts, strange beasts, and demonic beasts didn't have such a thing. You could slash them now, but sacred beasts and strange beasts similarly had to set goals for themselves if they wanted to reach the peak and become immortals. For example, the winged white tiger star that the 4th ancestor feared was its future vision. Because strange beasts couldn't be reborn based on the past and future, their visions of the future weren't afraid of being slashed. What Lu Xiaoyi was facing now was such a thing, the fourth ancestor's future image. It was punishing him with this, and he had nowhere to run. This wasn't the normal battle rhythm of strange beasts. In a real battle, it naturally wouldn't take off its pants to fart. It had the most powerful present body, but it didn't use its future body. But in this magical space, it could be used. Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood. If he wanted to resist this kind of punishment, the only way was to use the vision of the future against it. This was a quality. Chapter 17:12. After a cultivator's primordial spirit grew strong, he would immediately face the final stage of dividing his spirit into qi. This was also the final stage of whether a cultivator could become a yang spirit or not. Dividing spirit into qi referred to the extreme application of a cultivator's own primordial spirit. Through a secret method, the primordial spirit would eventually come out of the body and form a brand new body. This body not only referred to the body of the spirit, but also the body of flesh and blood. This process would introduce a lot of concepts of time and space, because the ability to regenerate after becoming a yang spirit was actually the ability of a yang spirit to be reborn. It would reflect on one's own past and future and become a limited immortal body. In order to divide one's spirit, one had to first establish a few basic points. For example, where should one place one's past and where should one place one's future? Only by establishing these and having something to refer to could one truly begin to divide one's primordial spirit. After Lu Xiaoyi had first beheaded the yang spirit, he had thought that his flying sword had really gone to his opponent's past and future. Later, as his knowledge became wider and wider and his realm became higher and higher, he realized that the flying sword had not really flown to the past and future. In the cultivation world, the so-called cutting off one's past and future was actually just the affirmation of a cultivator's past in his sea of consciousness. The plan for the future was a mysterious category of superconsciousness. Then, when the cultivator was ready to split his spirit into qi, he had to choose a past for himself in his own consciousness, a past that could establish his true spirit. In the future, his rebirth would be based on this spirit as the foundation, reflecting in the void. He needed to choose a future direction, a life plan, a cultivation method path, and a view of the universe, and persevere in the future. This was the reason why it was impossible to change the direction of cultivation when one reached the stage of primordial spirit and yang spirit. They could no longer change their sect just because they had obtained some great inheritance. This was because not only did they deny their past, but they also overturned their future. In other words, they had lost the ability to be reborn. Dividing spirit into qi was a key step before becoming a yang spirit. Its basic idea was to trace one's true self outside the body through the division of one's own primordial spirit. Due to the rules of the way of heaven, it was impossible for two true selves to exist in the same sky. Therefore, it was possible to blend the way of time and space, integrate the past and future, and achieve the immortal body of the yang spirit. Once this virtual yang spirit was separated, it would immediately fall apart under the rules of the way of the heavens, because it could not coexist with the main body. However, if the main body died, it would immediately reflect its true nature from the past and the future and trace back to itself. This was the secret of rebirth. The key was to create a separate self. However, in ancient times, the rebirth of the yang spirit was even more troublesome than it was now. At that time, if a cultivator wanted to reach the upper realm of the yang spirit, not only would they need a self, they would also need to transcend the self. In this way, 3 of me will be able to prove the great Tao of Yang God. This was a path that all cultivators of the ancient arts had to take, including Lu Xiaoyi. This was the major divergence that occurred after the beginning of a yang spirit stage. To put it simply, the current improved cultivation method created the path to the upper realm. The primordial spirit comes from me, the yang spirit, the decline of the corporeal body, the decline of the Dharma power, the decline of the primordial spirit, the decline of the lifespan, the decline of the Tao heart, and become a human immortal. As for the path to the upper realm of the ancient arts, it was the primordial spirit comes from the self, transcends the self, the yang spirit, slay the three corpses, and become a human immortal. The modern version of the path to advancement was relatively simple. Moreover, there were traces to follow and laws to rely on. One step at a time, it was solid. Cultivators would clearly know where they were, what they needed to cultivate, what they needed to pay attention to, where they were weak, and where they needed to strengthen. Then, they would mobilize all their resources to achieve it. It was like there was a high wall in front of them. The wall existed there. How could they get over it? You can find a ladder, tie a rope, put a stake in a wall, build a mountain, ride a balloon, or drill a hole in the ground. There are always many ways. According to the characteristics of your martial arts, you can always find a suitable way to cross the wall. Even if you fall to your death in front of the wall, you can at least touch it, right? The advantage of the ancient arts was its speed. On this point, the current cultivation method could not catch up. It did not consume a lot of time at all. It could easily take tens of thousands of years to travel through the blight realm and be trapped to death in an unspeakable place. It directly skipped 5 blight realms, slay the 3 corpses, and become a human immortal. Of course, the ancient arts also had a fatal weakness. There were no traces to be found, and there was no way to rely on. You did not know where you were, nor did you know how to work hard. You did not even know the direction to advance. Like a headless fly, you could only passively wait for a rare flash of inspiration. It was also a wall, but the wall in the upper realm of the ancient arts was a wall that could not be seen, touched, or felt. You did not even know where it was. How high was it? How thick was it? Were there any thorny traps on it? All the cultivators who fell under this wall died of depression because they could not even touch the wall. They wasted their lives in the long river of time. This was not the most painful thing. The most painful thing was that the time they spent waiting was abnormally unbearable. Modern cultivation method cultivators had the ability to be reborn at the yang spirit realm, so they had many opportunities to correct their mistakes. However, the ancient arts cultivators were much more embarrassed. The ancient arts had to cultivate 3 selves. In the past, the self was one self. In the present, the self was one self. In the future, the superego was one self. In other words, the 3 selves that the ancient arts had to cultivate were actually the past, present, and future. However, the after effect of this method was that because the ancient arts had cultivated 3 selves, the past and future selves were no longer hidden and obscure. They were like guiding lights hanging high up. As long as one reached the realm, they would be able to see them. There was no need to guess at their opponents at all. They just had to kill them. Therefore, the rebirth of the ancient arts yang spirit was a joke. If someone had the ability to kill him in the present world, then they would definitely have a way to kill his past and future. The ancient arts yang spirit had no secrets. This was almost fatal. How many dangers were waiting for them in the long process of waiting for the next realm breakthrough in the yang spirit realm? If the ability to be reborn was reduced to this extent, then what was the difference between the yang spirit and the primordial spirit? There were all kinds of reasons, such as the difficulty of killing the 3 corpses, the development process of the cultivation world, the actual need to hide the past and future of the yang spirit realm, and countless other reasons, which slowly developed the current cultivation path of the declining realm. This was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi kept showing off in the main world, but no so-called evildoers were willing to come out and deal with him. This was because the evildoers were now cultivating the ancient arts. The ancient arts did not hide the past and future. For a fierce person like the swordsman, the possibility of death was too high. Lu Xiaoyi had not started to divide his spirit into qi. It was not that he did not value it, but that his realm had not been completely consolidated. Under normal circumstances, he needed to completely consolidate his primordial spirit before he could start to divide his spirit into qi. However, this world was not a normal one. It was a mess. Therefore, everyone was rushing forward, trying to make the best preparations before the change of the era. It was not entirely his fault. If he did not enter the interior heaven, he would not have known that he was already in the first severing. There were many things that could be arranged in advance, and there was no need to follow the old system. For example, now, if he wanted to be beaten less, he had to create his future superego first. Chapter 17:13. Superego, which was the future, also needed to be chosen because it was an extension of the direction of one's cultivation and a projection of the end of the Great Way. For example, if one set the highest point of one's future at Yang Spirit, then it would be very easy to separate one's spirit. It was only one step away from the present. According to Lu Xiaoyi's own estimation, it would take less than 100 years to succeed. But the problem was that once one reached Yang Spirit, one could no longer go any further because one superego had already been realized. This was the most helpless choice for a cultivator. Unless there were some special reasons, such as not having enough time or special cultivation methods, and not being willing to go to the realm of decay, one would set one's future so short-sighted that it would be easier to achieve it. For cultivators with a little ambition, they would set their future higher, at least at chopping corpses or the realm of decay, and then slowly realize it in their long lives. For those extremely confident cultivators, they would set their future higher, such as man immortal, genuine immortal, golden immortal, and zenith heaven golden immortal. Just like these so-called evildoers who came to interior heaven, their goal of unifying the way was the innate great way. In other words, their future vision was golden immortal, zenith heaven golden immortal. In the past, this would have been inappropriate and unself-aware. But now that the Great Way had collapsed, such a vision was truly promising and ambitious. Different times meant different choices. In a time of peace, one's ideal was to be an official. But in a time of chaos, of course, one had to work hard to become an emperor. This was the so-called times create heroes. Therefore, no matter what, for those who ascended to the immortal realm, at the very least, they had the ambition to become an immortal, which was why they could finally reach this step. The rest of the people actually died in the process. Their goals were too high, but they couldn't complete the spirit division for too long. They were dragged to death by their own ambition. This was a contradiction that could never be reconciled. The higher the goal, the more difficult it would be to complete it. In the end, one might not even be able to reach Yang's spirit. If the goal was set low, it would be easy to achieve it. But if one wanted to go further after achieving it, it would be impossible because one's future had already been achieved. Among them, there were some differences between ancient cultivators and modern cultivators. If an ancient cultivator set his mind higher and farther, then he would have to spend a long time to split his spirit. If he could split his spirit, then he would have the possibility of beheading his corpse. If he couldn't split his spirit, then he wouldn't be able to reach his Yang spirit. Today's method was different. They only needed their own avatars to become Yang spirits. For example, if Lu Xiaoyi entered the decline state, he would already have the conditions to become Yang spirits. However, the future height of the surpassing self in the present would determine the degree of difficulty in their future when they fought with others. At the same time, it would also determine their true future height. Therefore, when the cultivators of today's primordial spirit moved towards the Yang spirit and decided their past and future, they would choose the great principle golden immortal without exception. This was like Buddhism's grand wish, the kind that didn't require any effort. It would be a waste not to think about it. In any case, there was no need to spend so much effort to transcend oneself like the ancient cultivators. Why not daydream? The two directions of the ancient method and the present method diverged here. It was very difficult for the primordial spirit of the ancient method to reach the Yang spirit, because it had two more avatars than the present method. Most of the Yang spirit cultivators who stayed in the interior heaven were making up for these two avatars. However, Once it was completed, it was possible to behead 3 corpses in a day. Moreover, from the quality of becoming a human immortal, it was even more powerful. It was much easier for the present method to reach the yang spirit, because it only needed to split its spirit once, its own spirit. It was easier for the upper yang spirit, but after reaching the declined state, it would take a long time. Without tens of thousands of years, it wouldn't even be able to touch the edge of the human immortal. Moreover, the quality of the human immortal who achieved this was inferior to that of the corpse severing. This was what Lu Xiaoyi had learned from various aspects over these years. From the primordial spirit to the yang spirit, and then to the first severance, he hadn't thought about it in depth. He only had a vague idea of it, but now, in order to reduce the need to think about it, he had no choice but to put all this on the agenda. Moreover, it had to be resolved immediately, because he didn't know how long the fourth ancestor White Tiger would imprison him. For these second severance old monsters, especially the old monsters that were born from strange beasts, they had a lifespan of tens of thousands of years. It was normal to imprison someone in a small black room for 100 or 80 years, right? Even in the domed ceiling. For committing such a crime of defying the grand ancestor, it was normal for the primordial spirit to be imprisoned for 100 or 80 years. Since he could be imprisoned for so many years anyway, and had nothing to do, why not take the opportunity to create a superego? It was for the sake of the order of the upper cultivation levels that should have been there in the first place, and also to reduce unnecessary suffering. This was Lu Xiaoyi's true thoughts. In this period of time, he had been forced to act against his will too many times. It was like he had seen a ghost. He had been messed with by Shi Zhao, by the 3 Qins, and now by the 4th ancestor. Was this a case of shooting the bird that stuck its head out? Now, the question before Lu Xiaoyi was, how should he choose this future self? Sun God? Half immortal? He definitely couldn't choose these, because with his messy cultivation levels, he really couldn't determine what position he was in. Don't choose the future, and end up choosing the past, right? After all, he could already be considered to have killed a corpse using the ancient technique. Thus, his choices were actually very narrow. Human immortal? True immortal? Golden immortal? Golden immortal? For the sake of doing evil deeds in the future, would he be able to do as he wished if he didn't stand at the position of a golden immortal? For the sake of freedom in the future, to not become a tool of others, to live a carefree life, would he be able to do it if he didn't become a golden immortal? For the sake of passing down the legacy of the Tao, in the current situation where the orthodox Taoism was strong and the sword vein was weak, to maintain the swordsman's eternity, wouldn't a golden immortal be able to withstand it? For the sake of the sword vein, the 2 restless ancestors, the general, the great emperor, and the crow ancestor, wouldn't a golden immortal be able to withstand the debts and *T? For the sake of the 36 Khanate great Daos, it was like 36 steaming Rujiamos. Such an incomparable temptation. Wouldn't a golden immortal be able to eat it? For the sake of making one's own voice during the change of the era, to not be suppressed and drowned out by others, for the sake of long-term peace and stability for the next few million years after the change of the era, wouldn't a golden immortal be able to withstand it? Although he was a transmigrator, his pride was integrated into his bones and blood. Although he rarely showed it, when did his actions not secretly show his supremacy? To do this in the team of immortals, one had to be a golden immortal. In the 2,000 years of his cultivation, how many things had he done that were impossible in the eyes of ordinary people? Now, even those Buddhist Taoists and yang gods couldn't understand an existence like him. His luck wasn't that omnipresent, but it was never lacking during crucial moments. With all of these added up, Lu Xiaoyi finally decided his future beyond himself. Then let be the 3 graces. The crow ancestor took a step back, but he took a step forward instead. If the little pawn sank to the bottom, would it be over if he didn't clean up the chessboard? Chapter 1714. What was Hong? Lu Xiaoyi was actually guessing. He couldn't be blamed for being too careless. A Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal only needed to combine one of the key innate great Taoists: time, fate, the five elements, morality, and karma. He was now aiming to take in all 36 of them. Was this something a Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal could handle? And now there was another problem. If he really took in all 36 of them, what would the others do? Could it be that the Immortal Court had no more Golden Immortals after the change of era? Would everyone reach the peak of true immortal? Or would they transform into Hong, Queen, and feedback? But in reality, they didn't fit any of them? This question was too far away, and he couldn't be bothered to think about it. Let's muddy the waters first. To be honest, his superego was a little irresponsible. As long as I'm full, it's none of my business whether you can eat or not. This kind of irresponsibility wasn't just the beginning. In fact, from the moment he chose to combine his nascent self in the big and small universe, karma had already been planted. He was destined to only have one path. He couldn't choose between a Golden Immortal and a Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal, because combining only one innate great Tao was impossible for him to become an immortal. If he wanted to combine, he could only combine all 36 of them. They were all driven by ghosts and had nothing to do with him. Then what was Hong? He had been thinking about this question for many years since he formed his nascent soul. Was it the rules? The order? Or was it just the combination of 36 innate great Taos? He thought about many things, and then he overturned them one by one. He originally thought that he would have to think for a long time, but when he was forced to this point, he suddenly had a realization. My problem is that I think too much, so much so that I'm confused by myself. There was no need for him to think about the so-called rules and order. He only needed to know one thing, and that was Hong was the universe, and the universe was Hong. Since he wanted to transform into the universe, then he would naturally transform into Hong. As for what to do with the 3 Hong and 4 Hong, he could only think about it when the time came. There were too many unfathomable secrets in the cultivation world of the universe. For example, the most fanciful one was the 12 collapsed innate great Taos. Where did their Tao integration ancestors go? Would you stop your Tao integration just because you had to think about this question? Impossible. You'll know everything when you're Tao integration. It's useless to think about it. Lu Xiaoyi decided not to let his imagination run wild because the white tiger kept ramming into him endlessly. He needed to establish his superego first. It was to build one's own little universe using the visualization method. At first, it might be very simple and limited. As time passed, it would slowly enrich and expand. He built it very quickly, at least in the beginning. This was because he had been working on it ever since he formed his nascent soul. He had his own set of cosmology. He had his own Een spirit and then his primordial spirit. He had never stopped building it. It was just that he had not integrated it into the future of the superego. Fortunately, the white tiger's attacks were intermittent, giving him enough time to construct his superego. Was it trying to get close to him? Because humans and beasts were different, his future superego would never be able to leave his body to attack. But when it was built in his consciousness, it could withstand the impact of the 6th patriarch. This was a clash between man and beast. Perhaps it could only be realized in the white tiger's natal space. However, Lu Xiaoyi did not take any less hits just because he had already established his superego defense. Neither did he take any lighter hits. He was still taking as much hits as before. This could only mean that the 6th patriarch had not used his full strength in the beginning. When he started to build up his own superego consciousness, he was able to defend himself against the white tiger's superego. The 6th patriarch also increased the pressure on his superego. In the end, he still maintained the same intensity of his attacks. This was a little bullying. There was no point in thinking about anything else. The only way was to strengthen his superego ability. There was a limit to the 6th patriarch's superego power. From the outside, it was probably at the level of a true immortal. This was not because the 6th patriarch was not ambitious, but because his roots as a strange beast determined the ceiling of his future development. He could not think about the innate Tao, nor was it compatible with his roots. Therefore, He could only be at the level of a true immortal. Lu Xiaoyi's superego vision was a certain Hong. The difference was huge. There was a difference of 3 levels, and it was a difference in essence. After all, it was the vision of a superego consciousness. It was not the actual state of a true immortal or a certain Hong. Therefore, the speed at which it was built was much faster, especially in the early stages. Time slowly passed as the ancestor beat him with all his might, and the disciple denied it. Wei Ji's original intention was to teach this fellow a lesson for 100 years as a warning to his every word and action. However, after a few years, he realized that although his idea was beautiful, it could not be realized. After a few years, the beating turned to pushing and shoving, and then from pushing and shoving to the joke-like skirmishes. It no longer served as a warning, and was more like a joke between 2 generations. Youngsters these days were really tough. Most importantly, he could not tell what this little fellow's superego was. Although it had only been formed recently and was still in its early stages, could such a crude thing withstand the impact of his true, immortal superego? He knew that the goal of this batch of young human evildoers was to integrate at least one innate great Tao. Golden Immortal or Daluo were their inevitable choices. However, even the Daluo Golden Immortal superego would not be able to withstand the vision of a true immortal that he had visualized for tens of thousands of years, right? Could it be that it was higher than Daluo? He did not dare to think about it. These little fellows were newborn calves that were not afraid of tigers. Each of them was more daring than the other. Usually, they did not have the chance. However, when the universe was in chaos and the era changed, they revealed their true colors. Tradition was no longer around. Order was no longer around. When a new force was forming and was about to engulf everything, what could an old man like him do? Forget it. He had already beaten him up and punished him. He could not be too serious with the lunatics of his own sect, especially this lunatic in front of him who was beyond cure. He did not want this fellow to achieve his vision and use his words to brew wine. Even a true immortal was not safe. Lu Xiaoyi felt that he was ejected from the space and regained his freedom. The sun was shining brightly in front of him, and hundreds of eagles were circling in the sky. The wind was gentle and the sun was bright, and birds were chirping and flowers were fragrant. He looked inside his body and felt that he was completely different from when he had entered. When he had been swallowed, he was only a primordial spirit. Now that he had been spat out, he was a genuine first severance half-celestial. He finally understood that the only way to tap into his first severance ability was to establish a superego. Previously, he could not feel the power of the first severance because he had not even established the vision of a superego. How could the power of the first severance be manifested? Now, the vision of the future and the realm of reality overlapped and complemented each other. Only then could it truly reflect his current true state. He bowed again and said in fear and trepidation, "Thank you, Sixth Elder, for your help. If I succeed in the future, I am willing to drink medicinal wine with you." Chapter 17:15. White Tiger waved his hand. "Don't try to get close to me. I'm not your ancestor, and you're not my disciple or grand disciple. I can't afford to raise you. I'm afraid my lifespan will be shortened." Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. He wasn't someone who cared about seniority, and he still cared about fate. So he went over and wrapped his arms around White Tiger's neck. "Okay, let's not talk about those empty words. You're older than me, so I'll call you Old Bai, and you can call me Little E. Old Bai, you have good eyesight. You can see my problem at first glance. I've been depressed for a long time because I didn't know what the problem was. Now, I can fight without any scruples." White Tiger wanted to break free, but in the end, it didn't do anything. It didn't like the complicated formalities of humans and preferred freedom. Just like now, it didn't need to be bound by the identity of an ancestor. If it liked someone, it would get along with them, and if it didn't, it would kill them. This kid didn't treat it as an ancestor, but as a drinking partner. This made it very comfortable, and also made it feel cheap. It's not that I have good eyesight. It's that almost half of the people who came to interior heaven are like you. It's a common phenomenon. So when people look at you, they can tell that you just came to interior heaven not long ago. Speaking of which, it's not easy for you to survive in interior heaven until now with your stinky mouth. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. I'm not usually like this. I'm a very polite and humble person. I even write a few lines of poetry when I'm free. White Tiger nodded. I understand. You bully the weak and fear the strong. You act one way in front of people and another in private. Lu Xiaoyi was dissatisfied. Oh, you're wrong. This is called different from person to person and adapting to local conditions. Oh, I saw that you have a unique physique, so I was happy and show my true colors. White Tiger didn't want to argue with him. Who told you to come here? Lu Xiaoyi didn't hide it. I met the sword spirit of Sanxin. It told me to come to interior heaven. White Tiger was stunned for a moment, then sighed. Its dissatisfaction was diluted by a trace of melancholy. It had a common understanding with those true half-immortal elites in Xianyuan. They were not allowed to speak of its existence, because it had already become a thing of the past in Xianyuan. Even among the half-immortals in Xianyuan, only two people truly understood its current situation, Li Ji and Chong Lu. Demon Lord was still alive, so he will not talk about it. So, the only one who will talk about it and completely disregard his feelings is Li Ji. It can't afford to offend him. Li Ji had a good relationship with the three Qins. After the three Qins died, they turned into sword spirits and entrusted them to him. Now that the two of them were no longer around, what else could it say? The principles that he had once adhered to for tens of thousands of years no longer seemed important after his sword companions left one by one. All that was left was an indescribable sadness. This was also the reason why it did not hesitate to reach out to help this little fellow. In any case, there was still someone who needed its help now. If one day, even this little trouble was gone, then it would truly have no ties with this world. Was such a future what it was looking forward to? It did not know either. Seeing that it was silent, the atmosphere was a bit heavy. Lu Xiaoyi also knew that there were some things that should not be discussed in depth. Reminiscence was like a glass of old wine. The more it was drunk, the more it got to the head. Old White, how many years have I been in here? It seems that the newcomers here have a gathering during this time. Did I miss it? White Tiger raised its head, its heart turned, and the melancholy immediately dissipated. 2 months ago, there was a location information in the Fida stream. I think it's about this matter. You don't need to worry, I am not far from the Fida stream. And for this kind of thing, gathering is one thing, holding a meeting is another thing. It will not be late, but there is one thing I want to remind you. Since you came to the interior world, you should earn your own living. Don't expect anyone to help you. This is also the tradition of Xianyuan. We never form cliques here. Li Ji is like this. Chong Lu is like this, and you're also like this. Lu Xiaoyi did not care. So he said, don't worry, Old White. I have experience in cleaning up your own shit. White Tiger said again, you don't have to worry about me and Chong Lu. No matter what you do, it will not affect us. Just do what you want. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. With your words, I am relieved. As soon as White Tiger said this, it felt a little wrong. Its words just now were a little too full of itself. Thinking back to when Li Ji came here, he had caused a lot of trouble, and it might not be able to handle it. Forget it. It was better to be unconscious than to die. Who asked its sect to always produce such things? This was also fate. It pointed out the direction for Lu Xiaoyi, and this rascal thus raised his hand to bid farewell. Old White, when I am free, I will find you for a drink. White Tiger shook its head. Don't come. I will move tomorrow. According to the sixth elder's words, Lu Xiaoyi did not need to look around. He was in a good mood. This trip to the eagle's nest was not in vain, and he did not suffer the beating in vain. He began to truly experience the power of the first severance, and this power was still evolving. As he continued to perfect the construction of his superego, the corresponding power of the first severance also continued to be perfected. In this process, Only when the construction of his superego was completed could he truly achieve the power of the first severance. How could one judge his present cultivation level? It was a little awkward. One could say that he was still a primordial soul true lord, but one could also say that he was in the one corpse tier. It was a little messy, because the corpse severing was a little early. The most obvious change was that he felt his lifespan increase. It had increased by about 1,000 years. Under normal circumstances, after a cultivator reached the yang spirit level, he could increase his lifespan by 5,000 years by severing one corpse. Severing two corpses would increase his lifespan by 10,000 years. Now, however, he only had 1,000 years of lifespan. It looked like the heavenly Tao had cut corners, but in truth, that was not the case. Firstly, he was not in the traditional sense of a normal corpse severing and had not passed the yang spirit level, so the body of his primordial soul could not bear the increase in lifespan of the first severance. Secondly, his power of the first severance had not been fully unleashed. As the construction of his future superego was completed, this lifespan would also slowly increase. Would the heavenly Tao be short of a mere few thousand years of a human's lifespan? Simply put, his present situation was that of a dwarf in body and a giant in spirit. He had never thought that severing 3 corpses would come so quickly. But this was also the joy of ancient cultivation. The higher one went, the more variables there would be. It could change for the better, but it could also change for the worse. Because he had taken this step, his whole person was completely different from before. Not only in terms of body and spirit, it was as if his whole person had undergone a kind of evolution, a sublimation in all aspects. This kind of qualitative improvement in strength made him temporarily not in a hurry to verify what he had gained in sword techniques. Instead, in terms of cognition, he understood a lot of things that had previously been vague. Previously, when he looked at the interior sky, he subconsciously felt that this was not a place he should have come to. He also did not belong to this place, and belonged to the category where he was considering how to get out the moment he entered, because at that time, he was looking at the problem from the perspective of a pure primordial soul. But now it was different. Flying among the many celestials, he felt that this was his home, and he was the master of this place, because he had the right to stand here and enjoy everything here. Foolishly asking about the mysteries of heaven, and foolishly treating the future as a bull's horn. Foolishly boasting, the bull's horn was actually the mysteries of heaven. Chapter 17:16. The higher the realm, the more one would know, and the harder it would be for one to deceive oneself and regain the happiness from before. Especially for him, he had more troubles. Even if he was happy, how long could it last? After cutting off one corpse, he realized that he had cut off many things that he didn't need to consider before. This was also fate. Humans were not the only ones. Any other species would be at a loss when they reached this level. At this level, they wouldn't be like before, having a firm and clear goal. After sensing chi, they would have to consecrate, build their foundation, form their aura's core, and form their nascent soul. With this as the main line, they would arrange their own cultivation in life. Martial arts, external objects, opportunities, sex, and families would all have a clear goal. They would have no doubts and persevere. Although it was simple, this kind of life was actually very happy because you wouldn't deny yourself. There were countless peaks in front of you waiting to be climbed. There would never be a day when you would lose your goal, only regret of not being able to climb to the peak. Perhaps when they reached the realm of man immortal, they wouldn't be confused because they had a clear understanding of the past, present, and future. They would become the only themselves. Perhaps there were still higher peaks waiting for them, but eternity was set. In comparison, those who had just entered the declining state or had cut off one corpse but hadn't completed the last step of man immortal were more confused. In front of them, there was nothing. Especially for those who cultivated ancient techniques. They knew that there were 2 more peaks in front of them, but they couldn't see, touch, or feel them. They could only explore forward, based on their intuition. Because of this, they had a lot of doubts about their past cultivation. This was the after effect of looking at problems from a higher height. Lu Xiaoyi's next step was to stand at this height and re-examine all of his past, especially the entire system of swordsmanship. Many swordsmanship were meaningless. To him now, they were flashy but not practical, deliberately mystifying. He needed simpler and more essential swordsmanship. This was a process of re-understanding himself. It would take a long time and not a sudden enlightenment. It was only at this time that he realized that his previous imagination might be a little childish. Would his integration of his own small universe and the big universe be smooth sailing? Would his goal be clear? Would he be able to cultivate happily without any worries? He had indeed mastered 12 innate Tao, but the next 24 would only be harder. What was time? What was karma? What was a groundless thing? When others fought for the Tao integration stage, their opponents were only a portion of the countless cultivators. However, his opponents were everyone. Just like these so-called evildoers in the interior heaven, no matter how many of them there were who wanted to combine the 5 elements, they would only have 3 or 4 opponents at most. However, his opponents were all 61. This was the interior heaven. Who knew how many main worlds there were outside? Against the entire world of cultivation. This was the consequence of him choosing the nascent self. If his choice was made known to the cultivation world, he would become the public enemy. He was the one who had to be eliminated. Everyone went to the banquet together, but you ate all 36 dishes, licked all the plates, and even flipped the table. Is this something a human would do? If he hadn't reached this stage, he wouldn't have thought so much. Now that he had reached this stage, he couldn't help but think about it. Thinking about it gave him a headache. For the time being, he couldn't be unbridled. At the very least, he had to find an innate Tao as a cover. Yes, it could only be found among the 12 who had already comprehended it. Which one should he choose? The flying crossing stream had been very lively for the past few months. It was completely different from the quietness of the other immortals in the interior heaven. This rarely happened in the interior heaven, except for the immortals' emergence that happened once every 360 years. This place was different from the exterior heaven. Cultivators were very annoyed to hold Dharma conferences. They were all ancient methods with different directions, different skills, and different philosophies. How could they hold a Dharma conference if they couldn't all share the same goal? At most, 3 or 5 friends would gather. It wasn't about educating each other. Instead, it was about chatting like Shu Yu's tea ceremony to cultivate one's sentiments. It never touched on the direction of skills. This was the biggest characteristic of ancient methods. They walked their own path and didn't care about others. The flying crossing stream was a place where no one cultivated. There were many other immortals in the interior heaven who didn't have an owner. They chose it because of its unique location, and it was convenient for everyone to interact. In fact, there were no fixed conditions for this gathering, nor were there any restrictions. It had to be those freaks who had already taken the first step at a young age that could come. Others couldn't. On the whole, treating everyone equally was the correct way to cultivate. However, all the half-immortals of the interior heaven knew very well who was the main character of this gathering. There were those who didn't come because they wanted to be quiet, and there were also those who wanted to be active to watch the fun. Thus, those who came were not only the 62 freaks, but also many old guys, especially those who had reached the young god level but still couldn't take that step. They probably also wanted to get some enlightenment from this kind of gathering. The people who gathered were 3 second severance great elites. 1 Tao, 1 Buddha, and 1 scattered. This was also the correct way to cultivate. No matter where it was, this kind of lineup was standard and wouldn't be easily maligned by others. After countless years, it had already become the unspoken rule of the cultivation world. The eminent monks of Buddhism were named Gu Chan, and the great virtue of Taoism was named Yangon. Scatter people didn't rely on Wu Ma. Several months ago, the summons began, and every 10 days, it would be sent to the interior heaven. So far, it had been sent 9 times. It was both to pass on information and to determine the location. After 9 times, there would be no more messages. Those who should come should have arrived, and those who didn't want to come would be useless even if you sent more messages. In total, there were about 100 people present. Among them, 62 freaks were present, and 61 were present. Almost all of them were present because this was a gathering that belonged to them in the first place, and they were the main characters. There were also several dozen idlers. There weren't many at the first severance, and most of them were young gods who hadn't taken the first step. The situation of these young gods and freaks was just the opposite. Their cultivation level was higher, but they fell behind in taking the first step. The universe had changed, and the level of cultivation had also become chaotic. Until now, no one could say for sure who was more brilliant between them. In principle, everyone agreed that the young gods who hadn't taken the first step were stronger now, but in terms of future potential, the freaks were one step ahead. Who would be able to persist until the end was something that no one could say for sure. This was the final wait. In a few days, the formal assembly would begin. At that time, all the freaks would be given a chance to show themselves. Firstly, it was to prove themselves, and secondly, it was to create an impression of each other. In a certain sense, becoming friends between them meant that the orthodoxies and sects of the main world had become allies. If they hated each other, there was a high probability that the main world would be in chaos. Half immortal bodies, even in a large sect like Xianyuan, could have a say, not to mention that they had a limitless future. In troubled times, seniority wasn't very appropriate. This was the consensus of the cultivation world. Chapter 17:17. North Wind felt a little regretful that Taoist Yin, who was somewhat related to him, had not arrived yet. Judging from the timeline, if she did not come now, it would be difficult for her to come in the future. What was the reason? Was she unwilling to come? Did she not want to compete? Or was there some other matter that was bothering her? This Taoist Yin seemed to be a little weak. However, such a person was a good target for him to rope in, not only for this person, but also for the orthodoxy behind her. If it was someone stronger, North Wind might not be able to rope them in. As his interest waned, a few people came from afar. 2 of them were from the southern vermilion bird. In the origin world, they could be considered to have heard of each other. Thus, they naturally had to get closer here. Most importantly, their innate Daos did not conflict with each other. This was the basic condition for becoming friends. At the flying stream crossing, because most people came early, they met each other in advance. Occasionally, there would be people who were familiar with each other, and they would introduce each other. However, no matter how they introduced each other, there was a rule that had to be followed. That was the origin of violence. When it involved the great Tao, there was no possibility of coexistence. For example, among the 3 people who came, 2 of them were familiar to him. One of them cultivated Taishu, while the other cultivated unity. Judging from the aura of the unfamiliar cultivator, he was different from the others. He should be of yin and yang. As for North Wind, he cultivated origin essence. The one who cultivated Taishu was called Netherworld Child. He smiled and said, "Brother North Wind, we heard that you are waiting for a friend from the Azure Dragon Elephant. Why isn't he here yet? Was there a delay because of something?" Coincidentally, we also met a friend from the Azure Dragon Elephant a few days ago, so we came to say hello to you. Let's get closer in the future. The void of the universe was divided into the 4 divisions. The Azure Dragon, the White Tiger, the Vermilion Bird, and the Black Tortoise mainly referred to the 4 directions. There was no practical meaning to it. This was the common boundary of this group of people. It was not something that was dispensable or a division that they thought was unrequited. In fact, the 4 symbols heavens were also managed by immortals in the immortal court. They each had their own duties. The universe was too big, so management had to be divided into sections to reduce the pressure. This was human nature. In the 4 symbols heaven, the East Azure Dragon was managed by Heavenly Lord Dongsheng. He was a true immortal. Of course, he also had a group of 7 constellations under him: Jiao, Kong, Di, Feng, Xan, Wei, and Ji. White Tiger of the West was a servant of the ancient Dipankara Buddha. He was also a true immortal and had 7 constellation officers under him: Kuei, Lu, Wei, Lu, Bai, Si, and Can. The vermilion bird of the south was led by the 7-colored phoenix. It was a true immortal and had 7 constellations under it: Jing, Gui, Lu, Xing, Zhang, Yi, and Zhen. The black tortoise of the north was personally led by the great emperor of Zhui. He was a true immortal and had the 7 constellations of the celestial officials: fighting, bull, woman, void, danger, room, and wall. In fact, the cultivation world was right. From these personnel arrangements, it could be seen that Heavenly Lord Dongsheng and the ancient Buddha Dipankara were both humans. Needless to say, the 7-colored phoenix represented the universe's beasts. On the other hand, Great Emperor Ziwei's roots were innate spiritual treasures. It was exactly the same as the Heaven's Eye system. Therefore, the allocation of these 4 positions was a kind of balance of personnel. It was also the cornerstone to maintain the stability of the immortal court and the development of the lower bound. It couldn't be easily changed. Such rules slowly spread to the lower bound and gradually became standard in the important personnel structure. It wasn't a bad thing. They restrained each other, supported each other, pushed each other's shoulders, and argued with each other. Everyone just carried each other and dragged each other along as they muddled along. Immortals would also fight among themselves when they had nothing to do in the heavens. In this regard, they were no different from mortals. The only difference was that mortals were considered to be very temperamental if they fought for decades. However, immortals could fight for millions of years. Moreover, there was no such thing as forgetting grudges with a smile. This was because this was a battle of orthodoxy and couldn't be tolerated. Whatever the superior liked, the inferior had to follow. The likes and dislikes of the immortals in the upper bound would more or less be reflected in the mortal world. Especially when the time period was millions of years, such likes and dislikes would slowly be ingrained in people's hearts. Even if a sect of the White Tiger Elephant Domain didn't have the chance to interact with the cultivators of the Azure Dragon Elephant Domain in its tens of thousands of years of history, they would still consciously or unconsciously oppose each other when they met on certain occasions. This was the reason for history. Among the 4 divisions, the Azure Dragon and the White Tiger were more opposite. The remaining Vermilion Bird and Black Tortoise's allegiance was unclear. Although these 2 divisions were nominally controlled by the demonic beast Phoenix and the spiritual treasure Ziwei, in reality, the cultivators were still the dominant force. In such a chaotic situation, the relationship between the 2 divisions was somewhat complicated and difficult to explain. The human cultivators of the Vermilion Bird and Black Tortoise divisions were somewhat divided. Those who were loyal to the Azure Dragon would, of course, be loyal to the White Tiger. For example, Northwind and the Netherworld Child were slightly biased towards the Azure Dragon, where they sat on the fence of both sides. Therefore, they were more willing to interact with the cultivators of the Azure Dragon. Northwind was trying to rope in Lu Xiaoyi, and the Netherworld Child had also brought along a cultivator of the Azure Dragon. It was inevitable for them to choose in such a situation, so it was not strange at all. Northwind was very enthusiastic. This is, the Netherworld Child introduced Gao Xian of the Azure Dragon, a member of the 3 Pure Ones, Ma Bailu. Everyone met him again. This Taoist Ma spoke and acted with the demeanor of a great master. He was elegant and decent, and his insights were profound. He was worthy of being a member of a great sect with a long history like the 3 Pure Ones. Lu Xiaoyi was famous in the main world under his real name, Lu Xiaoyi, so he came here using his Taoist name, Cigarette, but Ma Bailu was the opposite. He was famous in the main world under his Taoist name, so he came here using his real name to avoid a lot of unnecessary trouble. A person's name, a tree's shadow, and the root of disaster. Ma Bailu cupped his hands. It is fate that I am able to meet this southern sky, fellow Taoist, today. I heard from senior brother Netherworld Child that fellow Taoist Shuo was waiting here for friends from the eastern sky. I was curious, so I brought the 2 of you here to see if you were acquaintances or if you had heard of them before. The universe is so big that we don't have the chance to meet each other. But the interior heaven has provided us with such a stage, a truly great opportunity. Ever since I came to the flying stream, I've seen many friends from the eastern sky, but I don't know any of them. I've never met anyone before. I've been thinking, is it possible that I, Ma Bailu, have such bad luck that I can't even see a single Tao friend in the interior heaven? So I came here as the last hope. I hope Brother North Wind won't take offense. North Wind laughed. It's not that you, Ma Bailu, are fated, but that everyone is fated. When I came to the interior sky, the only one I really know is the Netherworld child. At that time, I just looked at him from afar and didn't even say a word. In the interior sky, it is normal for people like us to only know 1 or 2 out of more than 60 people. We are in the minority. Most of the others are like you and don't know anyone. The universe is so big and boundless. After all, our lifespans are limited and we have not traveled through many worlds. Everyone is bitterly cultivating, so it is normal that we don't know each other. Brother Ma, you don't have to worry about it. Chapter 17:18. Ma Bailu laughed, knowing that he was telling the truth. A gathering like this would never come from a certain realm or a certain sect. It was not a free dinner. The conditions for coming here were too high and too harsh. Either one had to take a step forward using the ancient method or reach the Yang spirit realm using the ancient method. There was no third possibility. I don't know what kind of person Senior Brother North Wind is waiting for. Why is Senior Brother so obsessed? North Wind laughed. He could not say that this person's personality was weak, so he felt that he could take the initiative in a conversation, so he chose to say something nice. Cultured, refined, modest, and polite. A true Taoist. Ma Bailu felt a little relieved. Of course, he came here for a reason, because he knew this person. As long as there were benefits and excitement, there was no place that he would not participate in. Moreover, he would eat more and take more. Rice and vegetable soup, he would not even leave a drop of oil for you. He felt very strange. There was no reason that such a person could not come here, right? He could not gain anything from this person and had countless scruples. How could he be so easily shaken off by a mainstream monster? However, if he was really shaken off, he would still be a little happy. He deserved it. Cultured, refined, modest, and polite. This was not related to that guy, right? It was more appropriate to say that he was rude, irritable, and arrogant. There are many such cultured Taoists in the eastern sky. Knowing that his introduction was too broad, North Wind added, reciting poetry is right, and his literary talent is outstanding. The stone in Ma Bailu's heart was lifted again. He was not far from being able to put it down. This guy could compose a poem. It was more like a rhyme, since he likes to dance and write. Is he good at using swords? North Wind shook his head. He should not be good at using swords. He does not have the sharpness of a sword. He should be a pure orthodox Taoist. When Ma Bailu heard this, the stone in his heart that was about to fall was lifted again. Star escape? Wasn't this what that guy was good at? Next to him, Yu Mingzi interrupted. Junior Brother North Wind likes to keep people in suspense. You just said that this person's name is not good enough? Why do you have to take a roundabout way? North Wind laughed. Junior Brother Ma, please forgive me. It's an old problem. This person's Taoist name is a little, strange. It's called Cigarette Butt. I don't know why his teacher gave it such an ambiguous name. The few of them laughed. The Tao name Cigarette Butt was indeed not very elegant, especially at a time when smoking was prevalent in the universe. The Netherworld child was observant and noticed that his new friend was a little unnatural. Junior Brother Ma, is there a problem? Ma Bailu forced a smile. It's like swallowing a fly. The other 3 immediately understood. He had met an enemy. Son of the Netherworld was a little regretful. It was a good gathering, but he had brought 2 enemies together. It was very awkward. Fortunately, this person had not come yet. Perhaps he cannot come? The heavenly Tao often likes to go against people. When you expect a person to come, he will often be late. And when you don't want him to come, he will often appear in front of you in a dramatic way. A silhouette appeared on the horizon and noticed them immediately. It was heading straight for them, and there was no way they could avoid it. Moreover, with their status, it was impossible for them to avoid it. Beifeng hurried over, hoping that the two of them would not immediately become hostile. As he introduced the Netherworld Child and Ma Bailu, he explained that his meeting with this Ma Bailu was purely a coincidence. A great cultivator, a first severance great cultivator. He was still very elegant. Everyone's smiles seemed to come from their hearts, and Lu Xiaoyi was especially friendly. Brother Ma Lu, we haven't seen each other for several hundred years, and you're still alive? The heavens are really blind, unable to distinguish between good and evil, and good and bad. Ma Bailu's expression did not change, and he passed a ring of cigarettes to everyone with practiced movements. He also said, "The interior heaven is a place of immortals, and everyone must protect it. Do not throw cigarette butts around, lest it pollutes the environment." Fine, no one was willing to lose out, but at least he managed to be a gentleman who uses his words and not his actions. He had given enough face to the three cultivators of the southern heaven. So far, the 62 young freaks who had entered the interior heaven had all gathered. This was the beginning of a successful assembly. "Why have you come? I heard that you had a fight with the people of Hong He while you were running away. It's so lively down there, so why have you come up? You're making everyone uncomfortable." Qing Xian was very dissatisfied. Lu Xiaoyi retorted, "You can come, but I can't? Tell me honestly, how many years have you been here? How many ancestors of the three pure ones have you found? Isn't it good to stay in Zhouxian? Why are you three pure ones causing trouble everywhere?" Cats had their own ways, and mice had their own ways. No matter what method, as long as one had strength, knew the general situation, and had someone backing them up, they would definitely be able to reach here. Last time, in the Great Universe War, was there a shadow of the people of Hong He? They hid it quite well, and at that time, I really did not see any clues at all. Unfortunately, there are no seeds of the people of Hong He here, or else I would have to kill them to clear my mind. Qing Xian could not forget. In the Great War of the Five Rings, the three pure ones were the backbone of the main world's Buddhist sections. They had suffered great losses, and there were many casualties. Among them were a few of his former close brothers. This disappointment had always been hidden in his heart, and he had nowhere to vent it, so he had never stopped digging for the truth. For things like this, it was useless to talk to others or discuss it with others. Only by working together with this guy could they make a big deal out of it. Lu Xiaoyi sat calmly on the fishing platform. The moment I took this step, I understood a lot of profound truths. I felt that I had killed too much before and had lost the harmony of heaven. Now I have repented and turned over a new leaf, wholeheartedly doing good. Those grudges have nothing to do with me anymore. What hangy boundary? I'm not familiar with it, so why should I care? I'm warning you, don't bother me with these trivial matters. How could Qing Xian believe that he could turn over a new leaf? Even if the king of hell changed, he would not change. He was just purposely putting on a show to get some extra benefits. This person was just so sneaky, and there was no way to be friends with him. He had no sense of loyalty and responsibility as a swordsman. Xinyuan Sword Sect also suffered great losses in the Great War last time. Your lineage of the sword has always hated evil, and you always seek revenge. What? Now you've changed to abstain from meat and pray to Buddha. Where's the courage of a swordsman? Responsibility? Dare to be the first in the world? Lu Xiaoyi laughed and scolded. Don't play this game with me, Taoist. Courage has long been worn down by the three pure ones. With the three pure ones around, do we need the sword vein? Dare to be the first in the world? Since the Taoists are the leaders, why don't you guys go first, but my sword vein? Oh, when it comes to reaping benefits, your three pure ones go first when it comes to fighting for fame, and when it comes to giving out favors, you guys go first. So it's my sword vein's turn to suffer, bleed, and sweat? Dream on. Let me tell you, I know what you're thinking. If there's a move this time, the three pure ones will have to take the lead. Don't think of using Xianyuan as a shield. My sword vein can be your assistant, but I won't be the one to take the lead. The three pure ones are big and have a wide network. Half of the immortal quartz Taoists are related to you guys. You guys will definitely take the lead. Chapter 17-19. The two of them were whispering in each other's ears, bargaining, haggling over the smallest detail. Neither of them were willing to suffer losses. Although they seemed to have won the last cosmic war, they had actually lost face. Of course, they would think of ways to make up for it. Lu Xiaoyi thought so, and so did Qing Xian. Their current status was no small matter. With their current strength and status, they would definitely be one of the few people who had the final say when they returned to the mountain. If they considered their future potential, the entire sect would revolve around them. After all, the golden immortal realm, after the change of era, was the core issue that all forces were most concerned about. Whoever had the ability would have the final say. Therefore, what they were discussing here, in a sense, was actually a discussion between Xian Yuan and the three pure ones. It was a discussion between Qing Yangzi and Guandu. Because they had both taken a step forward, their right to speak was even higher than the two sect leaders. How did the winged men come? Someone was secretly helping them. How did the insect swarm come? Someone was secretly colluding. Without these two great aids, the Buddhist sect of the main world would not be able to form enough attack power. This was also the root cause of the heavy losses of the Fifth Ring. They only noticed the mobilization of the Buddhist sects of the main world, but they did not notice that there was a hidden malicious realm. This spiritual conference is an opportunity. We must rope in a group of people for our use. Even if the orthodoxies behind them are far away and distant water cannot quench the present thirst, just this group of people alone is a powerful fighting force. I've already asked around. In principle, we can still leave the interior heaven, as long as we haven't reached the Yang spirit realm. Therefore, I'm warning you, don't act recklessly, don't provoke public anger, don't become a target of public criticism. Lu Xiaoyi was disdainful. You speak as if everyone wants to go with you. There are 100 people, and all kind of strange things. Everyone has their own thoughts. Do you think this is a peasant uprising, raising the flag, and the clouds rise, and the scenery follows? 60 people. If you can rope in more than 20 people who are willing to do a job with us, it'll be considered a success. You don't even need to think about it. Therefore, when it's time to strike, you have to strike. Do you think that if you let them go, they will be grateful to you? Dream on. Qing Xian glared at him fiercely. She knew that this bastard was right. This was human nature. During the preparation for the spiritual conference, the two of them had been discussing how to teach Hung He a lesson. It was not a small fight, but the destruction of the Tao and the destruction of the world. As the current leaders of the Five Rings, the three pure ones, and Xian Yuan, the two of them were a little disgusted with the way the older generation of the Five Rings did things. Although they were known as space bandits, they were still not bold enough and not ruthless enough. Right now, being a bandit was no longer enough to solve the problem. Only an army could solve the problem. Of course, the older generation could not only be blamed. In fact, the real reason was that they were now looking at the problem from a higher level. These were things that the older generation of Yang gods could never compare to. Moreover, as time passed, the gap in their understanding of each other would become bigger and bigger. For the cultivation forces of the main world, the situation of the various sects and domains was a little awkward. The leaders of the sects were all Yang gods, and they were basically Yang gods who were preparing to enter the decline stage. This was a fixed path, and it was not something that could be changed just because you wanted to. Therefore, in terms of understanding, they could not keep up with the latest trends of the universe's changes. What was worse was that the half-immortals of the sects and forces had been detained in the inner and outer scenic heavens, so they could not receive any guidance from the higher-ups. This made them somewhat unable to keep up with the situation. Simply put, because they were afraid of pulling their balls, their steps were not big enough. Under the fixed rhythm that had been maintained for hundreds of thousands of years, they slightly accelerated the changes, but this was far from enough. Before the great changes of the universe, This kind of rhythm was destined to fail. This was due to inertia. Before some kind of opportunity appeared, they would not understand this point. Only this group of freaks who had entered the inner scenic heavens could feel some kind of difference here, some kind of pressure. The changes were getting faster and faster, and they could not afford to be overcautious, look left and right, and scratch their skin. Placing a bet, throwing the dice, rolling one's eyes twice. This was the correct way, because at least you had struggled before. It was also because they had gone far, and now stood high that people like Qin Xin Lu Xiaoyi could not tolerate continuing to let the Hung River realm go unpunished. They had to make the conspirators behind the scenes pay the price, a heavy price. Only then could they let the entire cultivation world of the universe understand the attitude of the fifth ring. Several hundred years had already passed, and if they waited too long, there would be people who would forget history. Lu Xiaoyi rushed back with this thought, but because he did not know his true cultivation level of the first severance, he was very troubled. How could he organize the fifth ring when he returned? According to his original idea, he should at least reach the sun god tier, right? Time would drag on for a very long time, so long that it made him a little annoyed, because even if he reached the sun god tier, he would have to spend a lot of effort to organize and communicate when he returned. But now that he had reached the inner scenic heavens, some of his scruples were easily resolved. He suddenly found that he seemed to have some kind of appeal now. Qin Xian's purpose in coming to the inner scenic heavens was much clearer than his. Through the inner scenic heavens, he would return to the fifth ring, and then prepare to launch a world-ending war. The only reason he was delayed here was that he wanted to wait here for his most hated friend. If he wanted to cause trouble, this guy would be there. He had always believed that this guy would definitely be able to come to the inner scenic heavens. If others could come, he would definitely be able to come, and if others could not go, he might not be able to go. This grandson was so evil. In the end, they hit it off, attacking the Hung River realm from afar. The first principle is to kill with one blow. Even crippling, it is not allowed. The situation of this realm is special, and the slightest leak may lead to a resurgence. In the future, everyone will be very busy, so who will have the patience to keep an eye on it all day? But because of the distance, it is difficult to mobilize the forces of the entire fifth ring. The method of yuanning of the perfected monarchs is not advisable. I think it is better to use elite attacks, so it is much more convenient to move. Lu Xiaoyi smiled, but did not say anything. This was the good thing about working with smart people. They could think of everything, and it was very relaxing. Qin Xian's expression was very serious. I have evaluated the strength of the Hung River realm through the power of the three pure ones, and found that this realm is very good at hiding its strength. Their actual strength is much stronger than what is on paper. Therefore, it is difficult to say whether we can achieve our goal with only the fifth ring, and without being able to gather all of our forces. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. You can just say that dozens of sun gods in the fifth ring can't do it. That is not embarrassing. Such a large realm. It is impossible to cover it all. Qin Xin nodded. That is why I thought of this. A total of 60 half-immortal level experts. Which sect, power, or domain in the universe has such a strong strength? If we can drag them down, we can settle this in one battle, and it will not be a problem to wash the Hung River realm with blood. Of course, I know it is difficult, but we should at least work in this direction, right? If we can drag down as many as we can. Even if we can't drag down all 60, we can drag down 30. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.